Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the most exhausting, uncomfortable, and mosquito ridden chapters in military history life inside the Mongol army. You wake up to a frozen dawn in the 13th century, and before your feet even hit the dirt floor of your yurt, a grizzled horseman barges in and grunts something that roughly translates to "Congratulations, you're in the army now." No questions. No thank you for your service mugs. Just a fur lined helmet thrown at your head and a vague gesture toward the stables. You're surrounded by endless plains, the sun is barely up, and the air smells like leather dung and dry grass. Your breath fogs out in a long sigh. Welcome to your new reality, soldier. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere special, let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not recruited into the Mongol army so much as absorbed into it. Mongol military organization works on a decimal system units of 10,000. If your village was conquered, congratulations, your entire neighborhood block just became a Zwoon 100-man unit, and your cousin is now your commanding officer. Promotions are fast, brutal, and usually based on how loudly you yell in battle. There's no official boot camp, no cheerful drill sergeant yelling slogans. You're thrown in with your new comrades, many of whom don't speak your dialect, and are told to get used to sleeping in the open and never putting your bow down. The grass is your mattress, your cloak is your blanket, and your horse is your pillow if it lets you get that close. The first few days are a blur of confusion smells you didn't know existed, and trying to figure out which side of the saddle is the front. Someone shoves a bowl of fermented mare's milk into your hands and calls it breakfast. It fizzes, it's warm, it's suspicious. But refusing food is rude, and rude gets you reassigned to water duty, which involves digging holes in frozen riverbanks with your hands. Even this early, you're expected to ride. Not just trot or meander ride like the wind is trying to steal your hat. Mongol horses are short, muscular, and trained to follow leg pressure and clicks of the tongue. You, however, bounce around like a sack of potatoes during a thunderstorm. Your thighs are on fire, your spine feels like it's been reassembled incorrectly, and your horse keeps side-eyeing you with disdain. You're told you'll be issued gear soon. For now, someone lends you a ragged saddle blanket, a helmet with a suspicious dent, and a composite bow that hums when you string it. It's made of layered horn sinew and wood complex, elegant and terrifying when fully drawn. You almost lose an eyebrow testing it. One of your new squad mates, a teenager with 3 teeth and a laugh like a crow, choking on a walnut, tells you in broken speech that the Mongols consider armor optional unless you're in the front lines. You look down at your felt tunic and feel a sudden sense of exposure. At night, the wind screeches across the steppe. There's no fire smoke gives away position. You share a sheepskin with a guy named Batu who snores like a thunder god and claims he once wrestled a bear. You believe him. You have to. He's the one holding the sheepskin. The culture shock is immense. You learn fast that everything has its place. The bow always goes on the left, the saber on the right, and stepping over someone's saddle is considered an insult, punishable by at least a punch to the face. Horses are sacred. Fire is sacred. Bread is sacred. Your opinion? Not so much. Historians still argue whether these new recruits, especially those from conquered lands, were ever truly loyal to the Mongol cause. Some say they followed out of fear, others out of admiration for the brutal efficiency of their new rulers. You, at this moment, are motivated mostly by the threat of being used as bait in the next battle. One evening, an elder in your unit, his beard braided with what looks suspiciously like teeth, tells you the story of Genghis Khan's early days. You learn that Genghis was born clutching a blood clot in his hand, which apparently was a sign of greatness. Or iron deficiency, hard to say, but it's the first time you hear the name spoken with such reverence, almost like a prayer or a weather forecast. By the end of your first week, you've picked up basic commands, learned to eat dried mutton like a champ, and stopped crying when your saddle sores burst open. Congratulations. You're halfway to being useless in a real battle. Here's a quirky detail they don't put in history books too often. Every 10-man unit is required to be self-sufficient. That means you and your 9 grumbling, sniffling bunkmates are responsible for your own supplies, hunting, and discipline. If one of you deserts, the other 9 can be punished. Group project rules. Mongol style. Oh, and there's no tent. Unless you earn one or loot one, you sleep under the stars. You learn to wrap your cloak over your head like a burrito and hope the wolves think you're just a rock. Some nights it almost works. One morning after a particularly brutal hailstorm, you wake up to find your boots frozen solid and a marmot nibbling your saddle. You're too tired to care. That's when you realize you're starting to adapt. Not thrive, not yet. But survive, maybe. The thought barely finishes crossing your frostbitten brain when your commander blows a horn that sounds like a dying yak and yells for everyone to mount up. You groan, swing your leg over your horse with all the grace of a sack of cabbage, and ride toward whatever fresh horror the steppe has planned for you. Remember, you haven't even been to your first battle yet. You're not even a week into this nightmare, and already you've learned the first rule of Mongol. Military life appearance is deception, and discomfort is just part of the package. It starts with your hair. You wake up to find your tent mate Boro shearing a teenager's head with a blade that looks more like a rusted spoon than a knife. The boy is whimpering, not because it hurts, though it probably does, but because he knows what this means. He's getting the army haircut. You try to slink away, but someone catches your arm. Your turn, they grunt, and before you can object, your shaggy 13th century peasant mop is being reshaped into something between a monk's tonsure and a bowl of noodles after a windstorm. Welcome to your new look-shaved sides, a tuft on top, and a ponytail that flaps like a windsock when you gallop. It's both ridiculous and mandatory. Why the haircut historians still argue whether it was strictly symbolic practical, or just a way for commanders to spot you in battle and yell at you more efficiently. Some say it denoted rank or tribe. Others think it simply kept lice manageable. Whatever the reason, it's a rite of passage. You now look like you belong at least from the neck up. Then comes the horse test. They tell you the Mongol cavalry relies on endurance, and you're like, sure, I've seen horses in parades, but no, these aren't parade horses. These are war-stamped, iron-lunged, half-feral beasts that seem personally offended by your presence. You're handed the reins of a shaggy little mare named something that translates to soup meat. You hope that's not foreshadowing. The test is simple: ride her across a frozen riverbed up a ridge and back. No saddle, no stirrups, and no sympathy. You're barely on her back when she takes off like she's late for her own funeral. Your teeth clack, your knees flail, your stomach tries to teleport out of your body. Somewhere around the ridge, you realize you've lost a boot. Doesn't matter. Soup meat's going for the world record in rider humiliation. When you finally slide off gracefully like a dropped bag of onions, your unit leader claps once. Not dead. Good. That's as high as praise gets around here. You're told to tend to your own mount from now on. Feed her, brush her, talk to her. Mongols treat their horses like family members, mostly because they are family members. You'll rely on soup meat for warmth, transport milk, and if things go south, a somewhat chewy meal. Best to stay on her good side. You also discover Mongol horses don't respond to the usual giddy-up business. They respond to clicks, grunts, weight shifts, and long years of bonding you absolutely don't have. One of the veterans shows off by riding backward, firing arrows behind him, while his horse gallops full speed through a patch of trees. You try to mount without falling and accidentally sock your own nose with your knee. At night, you whisper your fears into your mare's ear. She blinks once and then farts audibly. You take that as a blessing. Let's talk tack. You're issued a saddle, but it's nothing like the fluffy, ergonomic kind you see on modern shows. It's made of wood padded with felt and shaped like something you'd use to carry sacks of grain. Mongols ride with high pommels to help them shoot and balance, but for you it just means more bruises in exciting new places. There's no forgiving foam, only pressure points and prayer. Your bridle is made of rawhide, your reins feel like wet twine, and your stirrups are metal loops that freeze solid in winter. You learn quickly that falling is less painful than freezing in place. Now comes the gear check. Your bow is inspected. If the sinew looks frayed, you're expected to fix it yourself with horse glue and grit. Your arrows are counted. Lose one and you're reprimanded. Lose 3 and you're reassigned to dung duty. Here's the quirky bit no one expects. Mongol warriors often carry 5 or more horses, rotating them like fresh batteries. While one horse rests, the other carries you. You, however, have one soup meat and a dream. When your commander says you'll need to keep pace on every march, you nod and pretend you didn't hear the part about switching mounts every hour. It's going to be a long, bumpy ride. Another fringe tradition, you pick up some warrior's braid, small tokens, animal teeth coins, knots of cloth into their horse's mane for luck. You try it and your horse bites you. Message received. Meanwhile, your riding squad begins actual combat simulations. You're taught to form tight circles with the other riders, launching volleys of arrows at imaginary enemies. The formation is called the Karbelgas, and you're expected to shoot steer and not die all at the same time. Naturally, you fall off twice, lose your helmet once, and forget to reload your bow. Mid-charge. Your punishment: licking, clean the unit's cooking pan. It hasn't been washed since the last eclipse. Still, you're improving. Your thighs stop cramping every time you mount. You can ride without screaming. And your horse only kicks every other time you saddle her. One evening, as the sky turns lavender and the wind dies down, your unit is called together. An elder rides up his armor, clinking softly, and tells a legend about a warrior who fell asleep on his horse and dreamed of conquering a city he'd never heard of. When he woke, he led the army there and razed it to the ground. The moral: trust your horse. And maybe don't eat so many mushrooms before bed. Historians still argue whether this tale was myth morale-boosting fiction or subtle warning against questioning orders. You just nod along and try not to fall asleep upright, which is apparently a sign you're adapting well. By week's end, you've made it past 2 riding drills, 3 gear inspections, and 1 close call with a vulture that thought your helmet was food. You're still sore, still confused, and still deeply unsure what you're doing here. But you're here. And your horse hasn't thrown you in 2 days. That's practically a promotion. You're not cavalry material yet. But you are cavalry-shaped. And in the Mongol army, that's enough to keep you breathing another night. The next layer of this delightful plunge into Mongol army life comes with learning how to kill people quietly, efficiently, and ideally from the back of a horse, galloping faster than your common sense. You're not ready, obviously. But ready doesn't matter. The unit commander decides today is Archery Refinement Day, which is a pleasant euphemism for see how many arrows you can fire before passing out. They set up crude straw targets, shaped like people, slightly charred, unsettlingly lifelike. Enemies: the grizzled trainer barks. You miss, you die, you laugh nervously. He doesn't. Now you've shot a bow a few times by now, right? Point, pull, release. But Mongol archery is a different beast. These bows are recurve, composite wonders engineered from wood horn and sinew. Unlike your weekend LARP gear, these take serious muscle to draw, and they're deadly accurate at distances you can barely see through the dust and wind. Also, they don't just teach you to shoot, they teach you to shoot at full gallop. Backwards, sideways, upside down if you're unlucky. The technique: thumb release. That's right, you don't use 3 fingers like Robin Hood. You hook the bowstring with your thumb, reinforced by the knuckle of your index finger, and release in a flick. More efficient, more stable, and more likely to dislocate your thumb if you do it wrong. You do it wrong, often. Your unit forms a long line. One by one, each rider gallops past the targets, loosing arrows with effortless grace. You meanwhile somehow fire backward and forward simultaneously and manage to drop your quiver. Soup meat kicks it out of spite. They make you go again and again. By the 4th run, you actually hit a target. Not the right one, but still progress. A nearby veteran grunts approvingly. You'll take it. The next drill introduces fire arrows. Yes, fire. You're given a bundle of pitch-soaked cloth, some flint, and a brief lecture. Light shoot, don't die. They're not worried about you burning the step down because it's already burned so many times that even fire is bored of trying. You light your first arrow with trembling fingers. The flame wavers, the horse bolts. The arrow drops in front of you and scorches your saddle. Congratulations, you just attacked your own horse. Despite the chaos, you begin to notice something: your hands shake less. Your breathing slows when you draw. You anticipate the horse's rhythm. You might still be a disaster, but you're a coordinated disaster now. Quirky fact of the day: Mongol warriors carried two bows, a long one for long range and a smaller one for close quarters mayhem. They also dipped some arrows in venom from pit vipers or decaying animal fat. You know, for flavor. These weren't just soldiers, they were DIY combat engineers with a flair for psychological warfare. Lunch comes in the form of dried curds, a rock-hard biscuit, and fermented mare's milk that tastes marginally better when you plug your nose. Batu offers to trade you his biscuit for your dignity. It's a tempting deal. That evening, you get your first taste of group tactics. A senior officer, a man with more scars than expressions, explains something called the Tulugma, a classic Mongol maneuver. Picture this: a frontal attack that draws the enemy in, followed by a feigned retreat. The enemy gives chase thinking they've got you on the run. Then when they're nicely stretched out and overconfident, bam, the hidden flanking units swoop in from the sides like wolves closing in on a panicked deer. You practice the feigned retreat over and over. Ride forward, yell, shoot, spin, flee, regroup. You forget the regroup part once and keep fleeing until you're nearly out of sight. They call that creative interpretation. You're given water duty as a reward. Now, here's where the scholarly debates come in. Historians still argue whether these tactical maneuvers were trained rigorously or just emerged naturally from years of hunting and riding. Some say Genghis Khan personally designed the playbook. Others argue it evolved organically over generations. You decide not to weigh in. You're too busy trying not to fall off during a fake panic gallop. One peculiar moment comes when the instructor stops the whole session to talk about arrow whistlers, those eerie, hollow-sounding tips that scream when flying. Mongols use them not just to terrify enemies, but also to signal commands in the heat of battle. Imagine a battlefield soundtrack of high-pitched screeches and buzzing death. Effective and deeply unpleasant. That night, your arms ache. Your shoulders feel like they've been used as chew toys. You can't lift your bow without groaning. But you fall asleep with a strange sense of accomplishment. You've survived your first real training day. You only mildly scorched your horse and you hit something that wasn't your own foot. In Mongol terms, that's basically honor student status. The dreams that night are weird. Arrows flying backward, horses speaking in riddles. Genghis Khan judging you silently from a throne of bones. You wake up in a sweat tangled in your sheepskin and decide not to mention any of it to the others. You're beginning to understand now this isn't just survival, it's performance, precision, a ballet of blood and hoofbeats. You're not just a soldier, you're part of a machine terrifyingly efficient, brutally elegant, and completely unforgiving. Morning comes and the bowstring calls again. Your fingers are blistered, your shoulders sore, and soup meat looks as grumpy as ever. But you're already mounting up, checking your arrow's eyes, scanning the horizon like a hunter. Because here in the Mongol army, pain is just another language. And you're finally learning to speak it. By now, you've mostly stopped screaming every time you mount your horse. That's progress. Of course, you're still a long way from mastering Mongol warfare, but today the focus shifts away from weapons and towards something almost worse: the daily grind of camp life. You might think the Mongol army is all charging hordes and flaming arrows, but when they're not fighting, they're organizing, repairing, and surviving with a kind of obsessive discipline that would make a drill sergeant weep with pride. Welcome to the world of logistical nightmares made oddly efficient. First, there's the Ortu, the military camp, which sounds peaceful until you realize it's an orchestrated sprawl of smoke shouting and the smell of boiled meat and wet horsehair. You're told exactly where to pitch your tent near the outer ring because, let's be honest, you haven't earned middle circle privilege. Your felt tent is sturdy, portable, and smells permanently of fermented goat. Congratulations, it's home now. You rise at dawn because of course you do, and immediately get assigned tasks. Fetch water, skin animals, clean tack, and shovel, you guessed it, horse dung. There's a system to all of it. Mongols may roam, but their camps are marvels of military order. Your day begins with the communal kumis stir. That's fermented mare's milk if you've been blocking it out. Everyone gathers to churn it in skin bags hung from tripods. The smell hits first sour funky like yogurt that gave up, but the taste, well, it's an acquired punch to the tongue. You drink it because dehydration is worse, and saying no means someone else gets your share of stew and possibly your blanket. You're learning that in the Mongol army, sharing is surviving. Everything's communal food duels, punishments. The men around you pass down meat, mend each other's boots, even take turns sharpening each other's arrows. It's not generosity, it's math. If the guy next to you can't shoot or ride because his quiver's broken, you might be the one who takes the next arrow. Here's a strange but true tidbit. Every 10 soldiers form a unit called an arban, and you're all responsible for each other's performance. One slacker, all punished. One hero, everyone benefits. It creates a brutal kind of brotherhood. The guy who snored through his turn at the night watch now owes you dried lamb strips for a week. Justice in its tastiest form. This brings us to discipline Mongol style. Forget fines or extra laps. Step out of line and you might be beaten, demoted, or have your camp privileges revoked, meaning no food, no shelter, and no warmth. That's basically a death sentence out here. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan enforced these rules out of necessity or pure cruelty, but either way they work. You don't see much backtalk. Speaking of rules, there's a curious one about cleanliness. Mongols rarely bathe, not because they're dirty. Well, not just because, but because water is sacred, and washing in it is considered wasteful. Instead, they cleanse using smoke, yes, literally standing in smoke as a kind of mystical dry shower. You try it once, it doesn't work, but it does make your eyes water and your clothes smell like campfire for days. Evenings are when camp life shifts from labor to rituals. They're singing, usually low, mournful songs about lost relatives, great battles, or favorite horses long gone. You don't know the words, but you hum along. Then come the stories mostly told by grizzled warriors with voices like gravel. One tale claims that a Mongol once split an enemy in half with a single arrow. Another says a man outran a hawk on horseback. You're not sure what's true, but everyone listens like it's gospel. Then there are the omens. A fox seen near camp bad. A horse whinnies at dusk worse. But a shooting star, that's a blessing. One night, a comet streaks across the sky and the entire camp goes silent. Someone mutters a prayer, someone else spits 3 times into the fire. You decide not to ask questions. As you try to sleep curled up with your saddlebag as a pillow, you reflect on the odd efficiency of this place. The Mongol army may move like a swarm of bees with swords, but it lives like an ant colony. Every task, every role, every rule, it's all part of a larger survival machine. And survival here doesn't just mean eating and breathing. It means learning your place. You mess up the water rotation, you're out. You fail to repair your gear, you're a liability. But if you pull your weight, if you wake early and work hard and choke down the sour milk without gagging too loudly, you just might make it another day. It's not glamorous, but it works. You're already seeing the payoff. Your bow doesn't creak anymore. Your horse tolerates your presence. You even fixed your cracked stirrup with a piece of bone and a strip of rawhide. Mongol MacGyver would be proud. Oh, and remember the guy who burned his tent down trying to make tea? He's sleeping outside now, in winter, wrapped in his own saddle. You lend him a piece of felt, because again, shared survival. He nods at you in thanks. No words needed. The next morning, you're woken not by a shout, but by a quiet bell. It's time to pack up camp. The entire unit is ready to move in under an hour. Tents down, fires out, waist-buried mounts saddled. You're part of the flow now, an awkward, slightly blistered cog in a terrifyingly smooth war machine. Still sleepy, still aching, but moving. Because the Mongol army doesn't sit still for long. You're on the move now. No more static camps, no more dung shoveling peace. The great machine that is the Mongol army is rolling across the steppe, and you somehow are not dead yet. It's impressive, really. You're sore in places you didn't know could be sore like the underside of your eyelids, but you're still in the saddle, your gear tied down, your bow slung across your back. The caravan stretches like a black ribbon across the horizon, dust trailing behind like ghost smoke. Traveling with the Mongol army is not a leisurely trot across grassy fields. It's a march of mathematical cruelty. The army covers up to 100 kilometers in a day. That's over 60 miles for those of us who like to measure pain in imperial units. And they don't stop unless there's a really good reason, like a flash flood or the complete collapse of your will to live. You ride in silence mostly. Talking wastes breath, and breath is fuel. You quickly learn the rhythm of travel ride. Dismount, lead. The horse remount, tighten gear ride again. Every few hours there's a moment to drink water if you remembered to fill your skin. If not, well. Hope you like chewing snow. The veterans laugh when you nearly choke on a chunk. Snow's for the weak, one says. Real men sweat and drink it back. You do not ask for clarification. The beauty of the landscape might impress you if your eyelids weren't half frozen. The steppe is vast and endless, the kind of place that could swallow an empire, and frequently did. Winds whip across it without apology, flat as a table, cold as regret. Once in a while you spot something in the distance, a crumbling ruin, a caravan of traders, or a single tree standing defiantly alone. Mostly, though, it's just you and your 100 closest saddle sores. You pass through villages sometimes. Not to stop, no, just to remind them who's in charge. Mongol riders appear, collect taxes, inspect supplies, and vanish again like smoke. It's quiet power and weirdly polite. Unless there's trouble, then it's less polite. Here's where things get weird and efficient. You're not just traveling, you're scouting. The Mongol army doesn't stumble into enemy territory blind. Scouts ride ahead, far ahead, like ghostly fingers feeling out the land. These guys make GPS look lazy. They measure travel time not by hours, but by how many days it takes to boil a pot of rice between rivers. Historians still argue whether Mongol scouts used early maps or just memorized terrain with terrifying detail. Either way, it works. You never take the same path twice, but you never get lost. And speaking of strange logistics, let's talk communication. Mongols didn't have radios, but they had something better: arrow messengers. These were elite riders who could travel over 200 miles in a day by switching horses at relay stations. The Yam system, they called it. Not food, postal relay. Picture the world's angriest pony express. If a message had to go fast, it was tied under the saddle of a fresh horse and sent galloping through the night. If it had to go really fast, it was handed to a rider who didn't sleep, didn't stop, and probably wasn't blinking. You're not in the Yam system, thankfully. You'd probably collapse mid-message and be buried under your own saddle. But the whole concept fascinates you. An army this big moving this fast shouldn't be this organized. And yet it is. You stop midday for a quick meal. It's cold meat, hard cheese, and a lump of fat wrapped in cloth that Batu swears is good for the joints. You chew it anyway. Tastes like regret. But energy is energy. Mongol warriors famously carried their food with them, including dried milk curds and meat jerky so tough it could be used as a weapon. You joke about sharpening one into a spear. No one laughs. Probably because they already tried it. A quirky fact. Some warriors traveled with live animals, not just horses, but sheep and goats, so they could butcher fresh meat on the go. That's right, Mongol fast food came with legs and attitude. Your unit has 2 goats, both named after insults. One of them stares at you constantly like it knows you're soft. The march continues into the afternoon. Horses swap out. Packs are shifted. You pass ruined forts and half-frozen rivers. Sometimes you think you see ghost men walking, where they shouldn't, distant figures on ridges, but you blink and they're gone. The others don't mention them. Maybe it's a step thing. Or maybe it's just exhaustion. As the sun begins to dip, the order comes to stop. Camp is set in minutes. Tents go up like magic fires, spark in the gloom, and the communal stew begins to bubble. Tonight's dinner smells better than usual onions, maybe? Or just slightly less rancid goat. Either way, you're grateful. And here's something you didn't expect: music. One of the younger riders pulls out a Morin Kur, a horsehead fiddle, and begins to play. The sound is haunting, low echoing like the wind turned into a whisper. It drifts through the camp and out across the plains. No one speaks. Even Soup Meat lowers his head. You lie back after dinner, wrapped in your cloak, staring at the stars. So many stars. The sky out here is enormous, like the earth forgot to put a ceiling on it. You feel small, but not in a bad way. Just humbled and cold. Very, very cold. The night shifts to watch duty. You're assigned third watch, the dreaded I just fell asleep shift. You drag yourself up, teeth chattering, and take your place on the ridge. The wind bites, but the silence is sacred. You scan the darkness, bow in hand, trying not to drift off. You last the full hour. You don't fall asleep. No one attacks. It's almost disappointing. The wind sighs like an old song. You sigh with it. Another day survived. Barely. You wake up with frost in your eyebrows. Not near them in them. That's just part of life now. Mongol mornings start cold, stay cold, and then get a little wind-chapped just to keep things interesting. Your hands don't feel like hands anymore. They feel like two frozen goat hooves strapped to your wrists. You slap them together until sensation returns in painful little lightning bolts. Welcome to the early shift. Today, you're not riding, you're repairing. Every few days, the army slows down, not to rest because rest is for the dead, but to mend, retool, and sharpen. This is Mongol version of self-care, which mostly involves scraping old blood off arrowheads and tightening the string on your composite bow until it hums like a plucked nerve. You pull out your gear. Your bow's seen better days. The Mongol bow, though, is no ordinary weapon. It's short but mighty, built from horn sinew and wood and a clever laminate that gives it absurd power for its size. Unlike longbows, it's built to shoot accurately while galloping full speed on horseback. And yes, you're supposed to master that. Historians still argue how much training Mongol youths had with bows before joining the army, but everyone agrees on one thing: you're behind schedule. There's a whole ritual to bow maintenance. You warm the limbs over fire not too close, or the glue softens. You test the curve against your chest. You wax the string with animal fat. It's oddly calming, like tuning an instrument that might one day decide if you live or die. You glance around. Others are doing the same. Some are replacing worn fletching with buzzard feathers. One guy's carving new shafts from birch branches using his teeth. You nod respectfully and scoot away. Next up, your saddle. Mongol saddles are high-backed and wooden, designed to support long hours of riding. They look about as comfortable as a medieval torture chair, but surprisingly, they're kind to your spine. What's not kind are the stirrups, which have started cutting into your shins thanks to bad posture. You adjust them, poorly, and get mocked for it by a 14-year-old archer who can hit a bird mid-flight while reciting poetry. Apparently, you're the camp entertainment. And then there's your horse armor. Wait, what? That's right, some elite units get light armor for their horses made of hardened leather or lamellar plates. Your horse does not get armor. Your horse barely gets brushed. You do the brushing now, gently running stiff straw through its mane, because you've realized something important in the Mongol army. Your horse is more valuable than you. Horses are everything. Transport food source morale, booster emergency ration if things go south. Mongol warriors often kept 3 to 5 horses each, swapping them throughout the day so none wore out. You get one. And it hates you. But today you manage to saddle it without a kick to the ribs, which is definite progress. A quirky tidbit: Mongols sometimes performed light surgery on their horses mid-battle. Arrow stuck in a flank. Out it comes cauterized with a hot blade. You witness a field medic rehearse the process with a stick and a piece of lamb. It's not appetizing. You suddenly miss modern vet clinics. As you work, a commander strolls by and inspects your bow. He grunts possibly a compliment or a suppressed laugh, and then tests your draw weight. He nods again. You're cautiously optimistic until he points at your boots and says something that translates roughly to those belong to a dying man. New boots it is. Around midday, training drills begin. Just because you're not on the move doesn't mean you get to nap in the sun. First, there's archery on foot, easy enough if easy includes hitting a melon on a stake from 50 paces while your instructor yells about your ancestors. Then mounted archery. You try the famed Parthian shot firing backward while riding forward. You fall off your horse twice, but the second time someone helps you up instead of laughing. So, improvement. You watch the others perform with terrifying grace. One rider gallops full speed and looses 5 arrows in under 10 seconds, all within a foot of each other. Another uses a thumb draw technique that looks painful but somehow delivers more power. Historians still argue whether the thumb release originated in China, Persia, or earlier nomadic tribes, but Mongols made it famous. You wrap your thumb and give it a try. You miss the target, but at least your thumb's still attached. Later in the afternoon, a more advanced unit demonstrates mock skirmish tactics. It's mesmerizing. They circle like wolves, darting in and out, feigning retreat, then turning suddenly to attack. It's a tactic known as the feigned flight, and it works too well. Entire armies chased what they thought were fleeing Mongols, only to be encircled and wiped out. You shiver watching it, and not from the cold. Evening brings some downtime emphasis on some. You're sent to help resupply arrows. Mongols made their own, of course shorter than European arrows, designed for speed and penetration. Some even had whistling tips, carved to strike fear or signal commands mid-battle. You find a bundle of those and can't resist testing one. The shriek it makes over the plains is both hilarious and terrifying. A commander appears instantly looking unamused. You are reassigned to goat watching. Dinner is stewed organ meat again with a side of sour bread. Someone plays music, another sings a tale of a warrior who tamed a storm. The stars creep out above and the wind hums through the camp like a low lullaby. You curl up near the fire, exhausted but still alive, which counts as victory these days. Just before sleep takes you, someone throws an extra felt blanket over your shoulders. No one says who. Maybe it was that 14-year-old poet archer. Maybe it was your horse. Either way, you smile. Tomorrow you ride again. Your eyelids peel open to a sun already crawling up the edge of the sky, but it's not the light that wakes you, it's the shouting. A sharp bark of orders followed by the clatter of hooves. You sit up, blanket slipping off your shoulders, and immediately regret it. Every part of you aches like it's filed a complaint, but there's no time for self-pity. Today's a messenger drill day. You remember hearing about this last night between goat bleats and dreams about eating boiled arrows. Mongol communication drills aren't optional. They're how commanders keep their army from turning into a giant game of telephone with spears. And if you can't deliver a message, well, someone else can. And they probably won't mess it up. You're paired with a senior rider named Togol. He's got a beard like an angry broom and eyes that say, "I once outran death and called it slow." He hands you a scroll already wrapped in tight oilcloth. Ride to the southern camp, he says, not quite looking at you. Don't read it. Don't lose it. Don't fall. Ah, encouraging. You mount up your still sullen horse, barely tolerating your weight, and kick into motion. The southern camp lies maybe 50 kilometers away, not far for a seasoned Mongol courier. For you, it might as well be the moon. Your fingers tighten around the reins, your bow bumps against your back, and the earth stretches out like a dare. The first hour is smooth. You lean into the rhythm, remembering the lessons on shifting your weight to save your legs. The wind's with you today. Lucky. You pass low hills and half-frozen streams, lone trees that stand like watchmen in the void. Now and then you spot another rider, always distant, always moving. You give a nod. They rarely nod back. Let's pause here for a moment of appreciation. The Mongol relay system. The Yam was basically a medieval FedEx on steroids. Stations were set up every 25-40 kilometers, stocked with fresh horses and supplies. Riders could cover hundreds of miles a day. Genghis Khan himself was obsessed with information control, and the Yam let him stay informed in real time across an empire that spanned thousands of miles. Historians still argue whether the system was adapted from earlier Chinese models or if it was an innovation all Mongol, but there's no debate on its effectiveness. You reach one of these stations around midday. It's a simple post, two yurts, a pen of horses, and a man sharpening a knife in a way that says, "Don't ask questions." You dismount, hand over your exhausted mount, and point at the scroll. The man grunts, hands you a fresh horse, and jerks his head south. No words, just motion. The new horse is leaner, quicker, and way less forgiving. It bolts forward like it has somewhere to be, and you bouncing in the saddle are just along for the ride. And then trouble. An hour later, clouds roll in like spilled ink, and suddenly the wind shifts cold and sharp. A dust storm. You pull your scarf up and squint, but visibility drops fast. The horse slows uncertain. You check your bearings. Where's that crooked ridge you passed? Was it behind or ahead? It's not like you've got GPS. Mongol couriers navigated by stars, rivers, landmarks, and raw instinct. You, however, mostly rely on dumb luck and vague hope. A gust tears the scroll from your belt. No, 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 no. You dive off the horse and chase the fluttering scroll through thorny brush, the wind turning it into a kite of panic. You catch it just before it vanishes into a ravine. Torn a bit, but legible. Probably. You slide it back under your belt with reverence and curse your ancestry. Eventually the storm thins and you spot the banners of the southern camp flapping on the horizon. You arrive disheveled, dust-streaked and wide-eyed. A guard looks you over like you're a particularly tired ghost. You hand over the scroll and collapse by the fire without waiting for permission. They feed you hot broth. You don't ask what's in it, you drink anyway. You spend the night at the southern camp listening to the lieutenant's review strategy. They're speaking faster than you can follow, but you catch something about river crossings, winter raids, and the importance of arrows that whistle like banshees. One of the men jokes that the wind carries Mongol words faster than riders. Another suggests using birds. That gets a few laughs. Historians still argue whether the Mongols ever used trained pigeons for messages like the Persians or Chinese, but there's no clear record. They didn't need birds, they had you. The next morning, you're told to head back with a return message. Your thighs are not thrilled about this. You mount up anyway. The ride home is smoother. The wind has quieted and the land seems to open for you. You make it back by sunset, handing off the scroll like a champion. Togol grunts in what may be approval, then adds, "Next time faster." You collapse beside your tent, exhausted but weirdly proud. You're not a great courier, but you didn't die. That's a start. Later that evening, around the communal fire, another writer recounts the time he once delivered a message across enemy lines by pretending to be drunk. The punchline involves a goose, 3 onions, and a slap from a Persian noblewoman. The details are fuzzy, but the point is clear. The Mongol communication system relied as much on daring individuals as it did on horses and infrastructure. You smile and sip fermented mare's milk. It still tastes like sour chalk. But somehow tonight it goes down easier. As the fire dies down and the wind picks up again, you crawl into your bedroll and pull the blanket tight around your ears. Outside, the wind sounds like galloping hooves far away, echoing across the steppe like the beat of a giant heart. You wonder if tomorrow you'll carry another message. Or maybe you'll be the message. Either way, you're not dead yet. You don't get to pick your duties in the Mongol army. That's made clear when at dawn a grizzled officer squints at you, waves vaguely at your boots and says, "Supply run." Then he tosses a worn sack at your chest and walks off. Great. No glory today, just logistics. Still, you're beginning to realize something. Supply lines are the real skeleton holding this skeletal army together. While other soldiers earn prestige by winning battles, someone's got to make sure there's meat in the stew and arrows in the quiver. Today, that's you. You trudge toward the quartermaster yurt where everything smells like wet hide and faint disappointment. A half-asleep clerk with more missing teeth than remaining ones hands you a list etched on thin bark. It's not even in your dialect. You squint at the crude sketches: horseshoes, dried fish, fermented curds, and something that looks suspiciously like a yak bladder. You decide not to ask. Your first stop is the blacksmith tent, which glows like a dragon's mouth. Inside, the air sizzles with heat and hammering. Mongol blacksmiths don't just shoe horses, they forge arrowheads, knife blades, buckles, and lamellar armor plates. It's a constant production line. You watch as one smith plunges a glowing iron strip into water steam, rising like battlefield ghosts. The tongs shake in his hand, and then plink out comes a flawless spear tip. There's an entire corner of the camp dedicated to arrow making. It's a meticulous, almost sacred process. The shafts are straightened with steam, fletched with bird feathers, and tested for balance. Mongol arrows came in multiple types, armor-piercing bodkins, broadheads for unarmored foes, even fire arrows. One particular arrow, short and stubby, has a hollow wooden tip. You ask what it's for. The arrow maker grins. Screamer, he says. Good for fear. A quirky detail. Sometimes Mongol arrows were dipped in fecal matter to cause infections. Yeah. Surprise you quietly double-check the arrows in your own quiver. Clean. For now. You run supplies from tent to yurt like a medieval Amazon driver. As you haul sacks of dried meat across camp, you notice just how well-oiled this whole operation is. Unlike European feudal armies that often relied on pillaging locals, the Mongol war machine ran on pre-planned logistics. They carried food water skins, extra horses, and tools. Livestock herds followed the army at a distance, tended by non-combatants. You even pass a group of sheep with little bells tied to their necks. One of them headbutts you. Mongol sheep do not respect personal space. Of course, when supply lines faltered, the army adapted. Mongols could live off the land better than almost anyone. They drank blood from their horses in emergencies, a quick vein nick, not fatal, and fermented mare's milk into Erig, their boozy, chalky comfort drink. You're offered some while waiting for a saddle repair. You drink it. It hits your tongue like sour yogurt and regret. But hey, hydration is hydration. Later, you're roped into helping butcher a goat. You've seen meat before, obviously. But this is an anatomical masterclass. Mongols waste nothing. The intestines go for sausage. The stomach becomes a pouch, the bones might become dice or buttons. Someone even sets aside the bladder. You suddenly realize what that sketch on the bark list was. No comment. Historians still argue whether Mongol logistics relied more on central planning or local improvisation. Some records suggest detailed inventories, while others describe on-the-fly solutions that make MacGyver look like an amateur. Either way, the flexibility is astonishing. One officer is literally melting down old arrowheads to make fishing hooks. You watch him loop sinew into a rough net, then tie it with what looks like human hair. You decide not to investigate further. As the sun dips, you're sent to refill the water skins. This means a journey to a frozen stream about 2 kilometers away. You carry a yoke with 2 leather bags and curse the ancestors of whoever invented icy water. By the time you return, your hands are red, your boots are soaked, and your soul feels a little smaller. But here's the thing, when you stagger back into camp and drop the full skins near the cook fire, people nod. Actual nods. No mockery. No sarcastic goat bleats. Just quiet respect. You didn't bring down an empire, but you fed the people who might. And in this army, that matters. Dinner is goat stew. You try not to think about it too hard, with flatbread and a side of fermented radish. There's even a spoon this time. Fancy. As you eat, someone retells the legend of the time. A Mongol supply unit turned an entire mountain valley into a makeshift warehouse, caves full of salt piles of spare bowstrings, even preserved kumis in buried jars. Others chime in with tales of river crossings, where supplies floated on leather rafts guided by riders who swam alongside their horses. You chew slowly, half listening, half proud, that you now have stories too, even if one of them involves being kicked by a sheep. You clean your bowl, wipe your hands on your cloak, and lean back against a hay bundle. There's laughter nearby, someone singing off-key in the faint jangle of horse tack. The wind is low tonight, curling softly between tents like a lullaby. You think about everything you hauled today. Nothing glamorous, no shiny medals, But every nail, every scoop of grain, every string-wrapped arrowhead, they all stitched the Mongol Empire together one yurt at a time. And somehow you were part of it. You drift off stomach-full, fingers, blistered heart, strangely light. Tomorrow, you might fight, but tonight you sleep. The drums start before sunrise, a dull, rhythmic thump that pulses through the camp like a heartbeat with something to prove. You jolt awake, mouth dry, your limbs stiff like half-cooked dumplings. It's not an alarm, it's a signal. Today is a March day, and this time you're not just tagging along, you're in formation. No more fetching yak bladders. No more flirtations with goat stew. You are now more or less a soldier. You crawl out of your tent into a whirlwind of motion. Horses being saddled. Weapons checked. Fire pits stomped out. The efficiency is almost unsettling. Everyone seems to know exactly what they're doing, where they're going, and how much time they have. Spoiler, very little. Your sergeant, a barrel-chested man with a voice like gravel sliding down a cliff, points at you and growls Column 4. Left side. Don't wander. And just like that, you're part of the beast. The Mongol army didn't march like medieval European forces, no random clusters of knights in iron pajamas, no aristocrats in gold-trimmed tents. This was choreography. Units were grouped in arbans, 10 men zuns, 100 mingans $1,000, and 2 mins 10,000 digilun. A decimal dream of military organization. You're currently one minuscule cog in that colossal machinery, trudging between a kid who hasn't hit puberty and a veteran with a scar that runs from ear to collarbone. You're given no map, no speech, no ceremonial banner. Just a direction and an expectation to keep up. You walk, then trot, then walk again. The pace is relentless but strategic. March for 45 minutes, rest for 15. Hydrate, adjust saddles, eat dried meat that tastes like smoked belt, then do it all again. Hours blur together the horizon, crawling by like a bored caterpillar. And the dust, dear merciful heavens, the dust. It rises from every hoof like an unholy fog coats your teeth, gums up your nose, even sneaks into your underclothes. You're a walking clay sculpture. You pass rolling plains, narrow rivers, the occasional skull, on a spike. It's not personal, it's just territory marking. Mongol GPS. Friendly reminder you're not in Kansas anymore. Or if you are, Kansas has taken a weird turn. To keep spirits high, or at least tolerable, some soldiers sing. Not full songs exactly, but rhythmic chants. Others mutter under their breath or gnaw on jerky with the enthusiasm of a vulture at brunch. You start humming something that might be Bohemian Rhapsody if it had been written with hoofbeats in mind. Around midday, the column halts near a cluster of low hills. A scout rides in fast dust, trailing behind him like a comet tail. He exchanges hurried words with the officers who nod, frown, and then begin redirecting units. You overhear something about a possible ambush. Or maybe it's just a flooded river. The two problems are treated with roughly the same urgency. Historians still argue whether Mongol mobility was their greatest asset or simply the result of logistical necessity. Either way, they could pivot faster than almost any army in history. At full tilt, they could cover 60 to 100 miles in a single day, thanks to a mix of strategic pauses, multiple mounts, and iron discipline. You continue the march in a slightly new direction, now cutting across uneven terrain. The horse you're given, because yes, you've graduated to partial rider status, is named something you can't pronounce, so you call him Greg. Greg tolerates you, but only barely. His hooves are sure, his gait smooth, and his eyes judgmental. Honestly, he's the most emotionally complex animal you've met in days. A quirkier aspect of Mongol marching culture. They often carried tiny animal figures or bones as charms, pocket-sized spirits, reminders of ancestors, or just luck tokens. One soldier shows you a carved rabbit made from horse tooth. You nod respectfully. You have a pebble that looks vaguely like a face. It's not much, but hey, it's trying. Eventually, you pass a caravan headed the opposite direction. It's not part of the army, but it's clearly traveling under Mongol protection. Traders, translators, and a group of scribes on short-legged ponies. One of them waves at you and yells something about inventory. Another is sketching furiously. You try not to look too civilian, but let's be real, you're covered in more mud than armor. Later, near a dry riverbed, the column halts again. This time it's for an overnight stop. Camp is set with dizzying speed. Tents unfurl, fires spark up, and horses are unsaddled in a flurry of practiced motion. You're assigned to watch duty during a second watch. That's around midnight. Joy. For now, you eat. Tonight's meal roasted marmot, seasoned with salt and what might be burnt grass. Mongols loved marmot. It was a favorite protein source, especially out on the plains. The preparation. Trap gut stuff with hot stones, berry, and coals, pray you don't get plague. One of the lieutenants swears the stones give the meat earth flavor. You nod. You're 30% sure you just swallowed a fingernail. Someone tells the tale of a marching column that once ate its horses, then built sleds from bones, and still made it to the next city before dawn. It sounds like a myth, but here you've learned not to question impossible stories. They're usually only slightly exaggerated. As darkness falls, you huddle in your cloak near a fire listening to distant hoots owls, wolves, bandits with poor timing. Your bones feel like they've marched 3 lifetimes. But your body strangely is adjusting. You ache less, you slump better, you don't flinch every time someone shouts. That's something. Your watch comes around faster than expected. The stars above are startling clear, vast, and ancient, like they've been watching armies crawl across this land for millennia. You stand beside Greg, who's half asleep, and you both listen to the snort of sleeping horses and the soft clink of armor shifting in dreams. You're still a pawn in a vast, brutal game, but now at least you know which way you're facing. You wake up face down in your own elbow. You're not sure how that happened. There's dried marmot grease on your sleeve, a hoofprint dangerously close to your bedroll, and Greg is chewing something that might be your sock. It's a new day in the Mongol army, and guess what? Today you're being tested. Literally. A horn blares short, sharp, and too early. You barely have time to splash cold water on your face before you're herded into a clearing alongside dozens of other recruits. No one tells you what's going on. They just start forming rows. The grumpy veteran from before Scar, still glinting like a sinister comma, grabs your shoulder. Evaluation, he mutters. Oh, that's not foreboding at all. Mongol military discipline wasn't all just about conquest and chaos. It was structured, rigorous, and deeply serious. Genghis Khan didn't build an empire on vibes alone. Soldiers were tested regularly on endurance, archery, riding skills, and, unfortunately for you, obedience. You're not sure which one you're failing yet, but you have your suspicions. Your first task, mounted archery. The instructor, a wiry man with arms like twisted rope, and a voice that sounds like dry leaves, points to a row of targets, painted discs, stuck onto bundles of reeds. They look deceptively cheerful until he shouts, "Ride!" You're shoved onto Greg, who's still chewing, and nudged forward. The horse takes off, and your stomach is suddenly lagging several feet behind you. You try to load your bow with the trembling fingers. Your first arrow misses the target entirely. Your second grazes a tree. Your third might have hit someone's lunch. The instructor watches with that tight-lipped expression that says, "I've seen worse, but barely." You remind yourself these are the people who could shoot behind them at full gallop. Backwards. While standing on stirrups. You're barely managing forwards and not falling off. Archery is sacred to Mongol warfare. From childhood, they trained with lightweight composite bows made from wood horn and sinew, capable of tremendous draw power and terrifying range. They could shoot accurately up to 200 meters and rain death down on cities from even farther. Your bow. Let's say it's more decoration than weapon at the moment. Next test formation maneuvering, you're placed into a mock arbin with 9 others and told to simulate a flanking maneuver. You understand neither simulate nor flanking. You try your best to follow the guy in front of you who is definitely winging it. The officer watching scribbles something down on a bone tablet. It might be your demerit count, or maybe a doodle of a horse laughing. Then comes the obedience test. You're handed a sealed scroll and ordered to deliver it to a commander on the other side of camp. No questions, no detours. You immediately get lost. Wander into the cook tent and nearly step into a cauldron of something gray and bubbling. By the time you hand over the scroll, the commander frowns at the seal. It's damp from soup. You are not, shall we say, excelling. But here's the thing, very few did, especially at first. The Mongols weren't looking for instant perfection. They valued potential, determination, endurance. As one soldier whispers to you during a water break, you don't get respect here by being fast. You get it by not stopping. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan's merit-based promotions were truly revolutionary or just selectively applied. But it's true that many officers rose through the ranks from humble beginnings, based not on bloodline, but on ability. That meant someone like you, if you didn't completely ruin your credibility with soup scrolls, might actually climb the ladder. Lunch is a tense affair. A kind of performance review, but with fermented radish instead of PowerPoint. You're handed a piece of charred bread, a strip of beef, and a second chance. The afternoon is less physical, more mental. You're quizzed on signals, smoke puffs, colored flags, horn blasts. Turns out Mongol armies relied heavily on coded communication. A single red flag advance. 2 black flags retreat. 3 quick horn calls ambush alert. You memorize a few but confuse all clear with charge and almost trigger a cavalry sprint. Oops. Then the strangest test of all silence. You're ordered to sit. Just sit. For an hour. No talking, no shifting, no yawning. Not even a snort. It seems silly until you realize why. Mongol warriors often spent long periods in hidden positions, scouting enemy camps, setting ambushes, or waiting for precise orders. Stillness was a weapon. Silence a shield. You try your best, but your nose itches. Your eye twitches. And Greg lying nearby lets out a pointed fart that nearly derails your concentration. You survive. Barely. By dusk, the evaluations are over. Your limbs are jelly, your pride is in tatters, and you're 87% sure your kneecaps have migrated. The officers gather. Whispers ripple through the camp. Some names are read aloud. Promotions, punishments, new assignments. Your name isn't called, which apparently is good news you're allowed to stay. A quiet compliment Mongol style. Later, as you sit by a modest fire, someone slides a bowl toward you. It's meat soup with a spoon. That's 2 nights in a row. You may be ascending. A soldier from another unit sits beside you, picks at his jerky, and asks, "You hear about the guy who used an arrowhead to pull a tooth?" You shake your head. He grins. Didn't work. And just like that, you're laughing, genuinely. It's the first real moment of ease you've had in days. You still can't hit a target at full gallop. You still can't remember the horn codes, but you're here. You're learning. You're trying. And in the Mongol army, that's more than most survive to say. By now, your body has decided that comfort is a myth, and the closest you'll get to a good night's sleep is collapsing like a human tent peg for 5 hours and pretending that counts. Greg the horse. Not a disgruntled uncle wakes you before dawn with a vigorous nudge to the spine. You groan, brush the frost off your blanket, and swing stiff legs toward another round of Mongol military wonder. Today, you're not marching. You're not training. You're gathering supplies, resources. Whatever your commanding officer points at and says, go. The Mongols weren't just fighters, they were some of history's most efficient logisticians. After all, you can't conquer half the known world on grit and goat meat alone. The system behind the army was a masterpiece of mobile efficiency. Organized supply routes, scout networks, and mobile foraging parties. Congratulations, you're in one now. You're handed a crude list on stiff bark paper. Arrows, horse feed, dried dung cakes for fires. Oh, and medicinal herbs, because apparently someone rode into a thorn bush yesterday and is now half leaf, half embarrassment. You ride out with a small group armed with a satchel, a dull knife, and a level of enthusiasm not seen since your last dentist visit. First stop a nearby riverbank. There, under the guidance of an older soldier named Tola, who smells vaguely of mint and bear fat, You're taught how to identify the useful herbs Mongols favored, Scutellaria, or skullcap for fever, Artemisia wormwood for stomach issues, and something called thunder root, which sounds like a cartoon power-up, but is actually used to numb pain. You pick a clumps with chilly fingers and wonder how anyone survived medieval healthcare without Google. Historians still argue whether the Mongol medical knowledge was homegrown, borrowed from Chinese and Persian sources, or a mix of both. What's certain is that they had practical know-how. Simple, direct, and surprisingly effective for an army, constantly on the move. Boils drain and slap some grease on it. Cough yak butter tea. Arrows in chest. Depends. Next, you're sent into the brush with another soldier to collect fuel. Not firewood. Fuel. This means dried animal dung. It burns clean hot and doesn't leave embers that attract night scouts. You fill a sack with it, trying not to ponder how your life spiraled into poop gathering for the most feared military in world history. You find comfort in the fact that even the grizzled veterans do this chore without complaint. One explains that on long campaigns they sometimes packed dung from home villages. Smells like home, he says with a smile. You're not crying. That's just dust in your eye. After a quick lunch fermented millet and something chewy labeled meat, no further questions, you're sent to the arrow restock. Now, Mongol arrows weren't one size fits all. There were armor-piercing bodkin tips broadheads for unarmored targets, and whistling arrows carved with holes to send sonic warnings. You get to carry bundles of each wrapped in hide and carefully counted. Each quiver is sacred. Losing arrows isn't just careless, it's a punishable offense. You're paired with a boy no older than 13, who moves like he's been doing this his whole life. He shows you how to tie the bundles with sinew, then checks your knots. Twice. You swallow your ego. He's better than you, and you're okay with that. Mostly, as you work, you overhear snippets of conversation, rumors of movement to the south, a border skirmish with a rival tribe, someone losing a bet and now having to sing every command for 3 days. The Mongol army, for all its ruthlessness, has moments of hilarity baked into its structure. It's not all fire and steel, sometimes it's embarrassing ditties about horselice. By mid-afternoon, you're hauling your haul back to Camp Herbsfuel, and enough arrows to ruin a small kingdom's day. The quartermaster, a woman with braided hair and a tattoo of a sun on her throat, inspects every bundle. She gives you a single nod. You want to frame it. You're dismissed, but not before being told you'll be on patrol at moonrise. Because rest is apparently just a story Mongol children are told to keep them from crying over spilled kumis. For now, you find a patch of ground to stretch your legs and chew on a hunk of cold dumpling. It's barely edible, but you savor it like cake. A soldier next to you is sketching something on a bone. Turns out he's been documenting his meals for posterity. Future warriors will want to know, he says with a grin. You're not sure if he's joking. Probably. Another comes over and starts telling you about the mobile libraries that sometimes travel with Mongol forces. Yes, libraries. Written knowledge was surprisingly valued. Mongol leaders kept astrologers, scholars, translators, and record keepers. Genghis himself created a writing system for the Mongolian language, adapting the script from the Uyghurs. A warlord who commissions alphabet reforms. That's peak multitasking. You think about the weird contradictions of it all. Bloodthirsty nomads, sure, but also poets. Logistics nerds, language inventors, compost collectors. By sunset, the camp is alive with low chatter, flickering fires, and the smell of fried roots. You've done well. No one shouted at you today. You didn't lose any arrows. You even helped splint a soldier's wrist with 2 sticks and some horsehide cord. Field medicine Mongol style. As night deepens, you sit with a few others around a fire. Someone's playing a Morin Kur, a 2-stringed horsehead, fiddle its melancholic notes floating through the cold air like a sigh. You feel it this odd, terrible beauty to the life you're living. Brutal, exhausting, and yes, a little ridiculous. But it works, it moves, it doesn't stop. Greg curls near your feet. You rub his neck and whisper, "Thanks for not trampling me today." He snorts, unimpressed. You take that as a compliment. You don't even remember falling asleep, but you do remember being woken up by a wet nose pressed directly into your face. Greg again. You've grown oddly fond of him, though the mutual respect still feels a bit one-sided. It's still dark, just the faintest line of purple on the horizon, and you're being summoned for patrol. Not a battle, not a training exercise, just a long, slow ride into the unknown, to make sure the unknown hasn't already found you first. You haul yourself up Saddle Greg with fumbling fingers and fall into a column of equally groggy figures. No one talks. They just move ghost-like in the pre-dawn quiet. Mongol patrols weren't thrown together randomly. They were calculated essential cogs in a military machine that moved faster than most kingdoms could even send a message. Surveillance wasn't a bonus, it was doctrine. You ride out in a wedge formation, 10 of you each with a different sector to scan. A thin fog rolls over the steppe like spilled milk, making every clump of grass a possible ambush. You're positioned near the rear flank, probably a polite way of saying, "Don't get lost and don't shoot one of us by accident." Your job is simple: observe, remember, report. But it feels anything but simple when you're scanning an endless sea of grass and all the landmarks look like smaller, bumpier bits of grass. The soldier next to you, older scar on his chin, no-nonsense points with his chin. See that ridge? If someone were going to watch us, it'd be from there. You squint, there's nothing. Which, according to Mongol logic, is suspicious. He tells you about how patrols sometimes went for days. No tents, no fires, just dry rations, saddle naps, and constant motion. You learn the language of wind, he says. How birds act, how horses twitch. If it changes, you turn your head. You nod like that makes perfect sense. You try to listen. The wind is saying something, but it's mostly just cold. The patrol continues in silence. Every now and then, one of you veers off circles, then returns. A kind of scouting ballet. You're reminded again that Mongol soldiers weren't just brutes. They were watchers, readers of terrain, masters of movement. Even without roads, they could navigate with uncanny precision using stars, sun, and sheer memory. Historians still debate how much formal mapping the Mongols relied on. Some claim detailed cartography. Others argue it was all mnemonic and oral transmission. What's agreed upon is that they knew where they were going and how to get there far better than most of their enemies. You pause to let Greg drink from a stream. The water is sharp with cold and tastes faintly of iron. Across the bank, another rider signals with a hand gesture 2 fingers. A tap on the chest, then a sweep outward. All clear for now. You nod back, mimicking it. You're learning the language. Slowly. Around midday, you dismount near a scraggly patch of trees. Your stomach's trying to digest itself, so you unwrap some millet jerky. It's like chewing salted bark, but it keeps you vertical. While you eat, one of the scouts shares a story about a time his patrol found an entire enemy camp in disguise. Tents pitched, low fire smothered, even the horses muzzled to prevent neighing. We only saw them because a raven flew away weird, he says. No sound, just lifted funny. You blink. You watched a bird and found an army bird's talk. He replies like it's obvious. There's a pause. Someone else mutters, "That bird still owes me a favor." The joke is dry, quiet, and followed by silence. Mongol humor is like their architecture, minimalist and sturdy, but even sparse patrols like this develop their own strange camaraderie. As the sun dips again toward the horizon, you're directed toward the edge of a ravine. There's something there, a bit of broken wood, scattered cloth, hoofprints in the dry soil. You all spread out and study the scene. It's not fresh, but it was a camp. Small, possibly abandoned, possibly a decoy. Your leader crouches, picks up a bit of burnt twine, sniffs it, and mutters, "At least 2 days old." You're about to ask how he knows that when he holds up a fragment of dried dung. Points. Still warm. 1 day, cold 2. Crumbly old. You nod, pretending this is normal, because now it is. After logging, the location symbols are drawn into a rolled piece of birch bark. Mongols didn't always need words. Sometimes diagrams did the job better. A simple curved line for the ravine. An X for the old camp. Two dots. A cross. Like military emoji centuries ahead of schedule. It's late by the time you return to camp. Stars above, firelight below. The patrol files in with almost no noise. Horses are brushed down, arrows, checked, reports delivered. You're not asked for a full debrief, but someone takes your birch bark note and gives you a biscuit. You take that as a win. Greg lies down without ceremony. So do you. Your bones are vibrating, but your heart is oddly calm. The day wasn't glorious. It wasn't epic. But you kept watch. You saw and you were seen. And now, wrapped in your fur, you realize that Mongol strength wasn't just in fighting. It was in the watching, the waiting, the warning. Before you drift off, you overhear one officer mumble something about Chagatai's unit needing new mounts. You don't know who that is. You don't care. You're asleep in seconds. Greg snuffles beside you. And somewhere out there on the steppe, ravens fly strange circles. You wake to the smell of boiled goat and the sound of someone arguing with a bird. Not metaphorically, a literal raven is hopping around camp, and one of the soldiers is scolding it for stealing jerky. The raven cocks its head, considers a rebuttal, and flies off with a smug flutter. You blink at the scene, momentarily unsure whether you're dreaming, but no. This is just Tuesday in a Mongol army. Today, you're getting a break from patrols. Not because you've earned it, but because you're being assigned to something arguably worse horse maintenance duty. You think this means brushing and feeding them. You are very, very wrong. The Mongol cavalry didn't just use horses, they were horses. Each warrior had at least 4 or 5 mounts rotating them daily to avoid overexertion. You have Greg. And now you have 7 others to tend to, each one with its own set of quirks, smells, and personal vendettas. You're not alone. A stocky soldier with an impressive mustache and a terrifyingly gentle voice is assigned to show you the ropes. His name is Organ. He gives you a rope. That's for leading, he says. Then hands you a stick. That's for convincing. Horse care, it turns out, is serious business. You begin with hoof inspection because in Mongol culture, a limping horse is worse than a missing bowstring. You lift a hoof, fumble it, and the mare gives you a look that says, "Get it together." You do eventually. Each hoof is scraped clean, checked for cracks, then rubbed with rendered fat. This helps protect them from freezing and hard terrain. Mongols didn't shoe their horses the way Europeans did because their horses, short and sturdy, evolved to handle rough ground. Also, lugging iron around the steppe, not efficient. While working, Organ tells you a tale about a horse that refused to eat before battle and saved its rider by suddenly veering during a charge. The horse saw what the man didn't, he says. You nod, brushing dust from a shaggy flank. Not quite ready to believe that horses have sixth senses, but honestly, at this point, would you be surprised? Historians still argue whether the Mongol horses were a distinct breed, developed through centuries of selective pastoral care, or simply hardy products of their harsh environment. Either way, they were essential. These animals weren't pets. They were transportation, food, warmth, and occasionally pillow. Yes, pillow. One of the older warriors shows you how to lay your saddle just right to sleep with your horse curled beside you, blocking wind. Better than a wife, he mutters. You pretend not to hear that. After grooming comes feeding, you haul a sack of dried barley mash mixed with fermented mare's milk. The smell is ambitious. The horses, however, love it, and Greg nearly takes your arm off trying to get seconds. And then, because Mongol horses were essentially ambulatory vending machines, you're taught how to milk one. Yes, horse milking. You'd laugh if your hands weren't frozen and shaking. It's awkward, and the mare is clearly judging you. But eventually, with Organ's help, you manage to fill a small flask. Later, this will be turned into Eric-fermented mare's milk, the lifeblood of the Mongol steppe. Tangy, fizzy, vaguely terrifying. You take a sip and immediately feel like your teeth have opinions. Still, it's packed with calories and probiotics, and it does something mysterious to your metabolism that lets you keep functioning on 4 hours of sleep. And a dumpling a day. Midday, you're allowed a break. You sit near a makeshift corral, chewing dried fruit, watching Greg and the others trot in lazy circles. A younger soldier joins you and starts waxing poetic about the wind-borne spirits of steppe steeds. You assume he's being dramatic, but apparently Mongols genuinely believed in a kind of horse soul, an elemental spirit that bound rider and mount. If your horse dies in battle, he says solemnly, you bury a piece of your armor with it. There's a pause. Then he adds, unless you're poor, then you just cry and keep walking. You snort your fruit out your nose. The soldier smiles. After lunch, you help repair saddles. Mongol saddles were high-backed and designed for stability during archery. They weren't comfortable by modern standards, but they gave leverage and control, especially important when you're firing backward at full gallop like some medieval action hero. You're handed a curved needle and some sinew thread. Stitch here. And here. Not there. You stitch there anyway. You unstitch. It's fine. The saddle survives. Nearby, someone's crafting a horsehair rope. Another is braiding decorative tassels. Mongols loved ornamentation. Even practical gear was often adorned with small charms, beads, or etched metal plates. You ask about one horse's bell. To confuse evil spirits, you're told. Also, it jingles nicely. You finish your work by checking tack and reins. Mongol bridles were light and flexible, often made from rawhide or plaited fiber. Nothing heavy, nothing wasteful. Form followed function and then threw in a bit of flair for good measure. As the sun begins its lazy descent, you're finally released from horse duty. You're sore, your clothes smell like a stable, and you may have hay in places hay should not be. But oddly enough, you feel proud. Like you've become part of something. A living ecosystem, really. You start to understand that a Mongol army wasn't just warriors, it was a mobile village, with horses as the constant heartbeat. That evening around the fire, someone tells a joke about a horse that pretended to be lame to avoid patrol. You laugh, you point at Greg. That's him. Greg farts and rolls over. You eat your meal, boiled grains, scraps of cured lamb, a dash of salt, and stare at the horizon already tinted with stars. Tomorrow will bring more marching, maybe fighting. Maybe just another weird errand involving dung or bones or enemy spies in sheep cloaks. But today was about horses. And if you're going to survive this world at all, you'll do it on 4 hooves and a saddle that smells like vinegar. You curl up beside Greg. He doesn't bite you. That's love. You wake up nose to nose with Greg again, but this time it's not his whiskery nudge that startles you. It's the unmistakable clang of metal against bone in the distance. It's training day, and your unit's scheduled to practice what the Mongols were arguably best at, the terrifying art of cavalry coordination. There's a kind of musical rhythm to it already. Riders whirl across the open steppe like migrating birds in a storm, hooves pounding arrows, loosing in sequence war cries echoing across the plains. You stretch pop your back and try not to look horrified. Today you'll be riding into the blur. You grab your quiver refilled with fresh arrows, each fletched with bird feathers, and mount Greg, who seems more excited than you are. A nearby soldier with a crooked smile offers a warning, don't fall. It's not the hitting ground part that's bad, it's the shame. And just like that, you're off. Your unit gallops to the training field, a wide expanse of dirt flag markers and various targets, wooden dummies, straw bundles, and one sad mannequin with a painted-on face named Timur. The commander rides ahead and signals with a raised whip. Today's drill, feigned retreat, a Mongol specialty. Basically, you gallop toward the enemy turn, pretend to flee, and right when they chase you, twist around in the saddle and shoot them in the face. It's like luring someone with pizza and then pelting them with tax forms. Simple in theory. In practice, you nearly fall off Greg during your first attempt. Twisting around to shoot backwards at full gallop is exactly as suicidal as it sounds. You fire an arrow. It lands approximately somewhere in modern Kazakhstan. Your comrades politely do not cheer. You try again. And again. By the 4th run, you're still bad, but now you're functionally bad. Your shots at least hit near the dummy. You don't fall. You remember to scream the proper war yell Ukai, a sound that's equal parts battle cry and motivational cheer. Historians still argue whether Ukai was used more as a rallying call or as a psychological weapon. But either way, it works. You shout it, your blood jumps, and suddenly you feel just a bit more like you belong here. Your commander adds a new element: signal coordination. One rider waves a red cloth, this means scatter. Another raises a blue flag, reconverge. Mongols didn't need drums or bugles like European armies. They used colored standards, hand signals, even smoke puffs. It let them act like a single, horrifyingly efficient organism. You watch in awe as the veterans split into wings, regroup on a dime, then simulate surrounding a target pour Timur again. The tactic is classic Mongol envelope: confuse, crush. Their battlefield choreography was more advanced than some modern traffic systems. One of the sergeants, thin, sharp-eyed with the voice of a crow, rides over and tells you it's your turn to lead a 5-rider feint. You try to say no, but apparently no in Mongol is nice try. So you ride. You lead your squad toward the target, shout the retreat signal. And as you break formation, you glance back, twist your torso, fire thunk. Your arrow embeds right into Timur's painted smile. The soldiers behind you cheer. You try to act cool, but you're beaming like a kid who finally won dodgeball. After drills, you gather for sparring. Mongols trained with blunt weapons; for melee practice, wooden maces, dulled sabers. The goal isn't to injure, it's to exhaust. You're paired with a teenage girl who looks like she weighs about as much as your boot. You expect to go easy. You get flattened in under 10 seconds. Turns out size matters less than speed. Mongol fighters learn to strike from horseback roll. Under attacks, use the enemy's momentum against them. You spend most of the match in the dirt, blinking up at the sky and questioning your life choices. During a break, someone offers you dried cheese curds. You're told they're oral, a staple of the Mongol diet, perfect for keeping warriors energized. You pop one in your mouth. It tastes like a rock that insulted a goat. But you chew bravely. Next comes a javelin drill. Unlike Europeans who often threw spears once and moved on, Mongols liked variety. If a bow wasn't practical, they'd use short spears, sometimes with hooks to yank riders from their saddles. You're handed a practice spear, told to throw while galloping, and then catch a spare midair from a passing soldier. You throw, you miss. You catch the spare and promptly drop it. Baby steps. By mid-afternoon, your entire body is shaking. Mongol training is like doing CrossFit, while someone occasionally shoots arrows at you for motivation. But even through the exhaustion, you see the brilliance. It's not just muscle memory, it's instinct building. Every move you practice is about becoming part of a fighting rhythm that transcends chaos. Whether ambushing, defending, or fleeing, while flinging arrows like a maniac, you're never improvising. You're executing a deeply embedded plan. One trainer quotes an old proverb: between drills, a warrior who waits to think is already dead. Then he smacks a trainee off his saddle to emphasize the point. You don't wait to think, you duck. The final exercise is a full simulation. 2 units opposite ends of the field, no holds barred. You're lumped in with some mid-level veterans and told to stay mounted and scream loudly. It's good advice. The whistle sounds and suddenly it's mayhem. Riders converge, flags wave, arrows streak, and dust clouds rise like thunderheads. You lose track of who's winning. You're too busy not dying. You nearly fall twice. You fire until your quiver is empty. And then just like that, it ends. A horn blast. Everyone halts. You're still mounted, still conscious. You look around. Greg is panting but happy. Someone claps you on the back. You didn't scream in terror once. Good job. You grin, then nearly throw up. As the sun sets and shadows stretch across the plain, you help gather dropped weapons and herd and stray horses. You hear laughter, jokes about who hit what. Someone claims they knocked Timur's head clean off with a single shot. That night around the fire, your arms ache, your legs burn, and you can barely lift your bowl of stew. But you feel it an ember of something real. You're not a tourist anymore. You're participating, maybe still terribly, but you're in the dance now. Greg snoozes beside you occasionally, twitching like he's dreaming about battle. You pat him on the neck. You think he won today. Your dreams last night were all hooves and arrows, just a looping fever reel of you trying to shout, "Ukai" with a mouthful of horse milk. You wake feeling like you've been trampled by half the cavalry, and maybe you have. The morning air cuts your face like a slap, and the camp smells faintly of boiled yak and ambition. But today, you're not marching. You're not training. You're on a special assignment intelligence work. Don't get too excited. It's not James Bond meets the step. It's more spy on sheep-wearing villagers to see if they're harboring an enemy scout. You're assigned to a small detachment of Kashig the Imperial Guard. Don't let the title fool you. This isn't palace duty with gold-plated helmets. The Kashig are some of the most trusted and elite within the Mongol military. You wonder briefly if you were chosen by mistake, but someone hands you a cloak and points west. Guess not. Your unit rides out before sunrise, blending with the dark. There's no big dramatic exit, just the whisper of hooves over frozen dirt and the occasional sniffle. One of your fellow riders, a wiry man who never seems to blink, leans over and says, "If you hear singing, hide. If you hear silence, run." You ask what that means. He just grins. Super helpful. Your mission scout a nearby settlement that recently stopped sending tribute. Could be plague. Could be rebellion. Could be both wrapped in a blanket and smelling like burnt mutton. You travel light, no banners, minimal gear, and strict silence. Mongols prize stealth and speed when gathering intelligence. They were the masters of mobile recon, using fast riders and advanced communication systems to track enemies before the enemy even knew it had been noticed. As you approach the village, you break into two groups flanking from east and south. Your cloak, dusty and torn, is pulled tighter as you squat in the brush, peeking through frost-covered shrubs. There's movement in the village square. A small gathering, a man making loud gestures. You can't hear his words, but his tone is sharp, agitated, not festive. You scribble down what you see in early form of field notes using a small wax tablet tied to your belt. Mongol scouts sometimes used coded marks carved into wood or bone for quick communication. One even tells you they use painted pebbles back at base. Black means trouble, red means battle ready, white means all clear. Historians still argue whether this color code was widely standardized across Mongol divisions or improvised by each two-man or unit of 10,000. Either way, it's efficient. Also kind of adorable. You stay hidden for hours, rotating watch shifts and chewing stale bread. Someone hands you a dried fig. It tastes like regret, but passes the time. Suddenly, you spot something strange, two men digging behind a yurt. You lean forward. They're burying something, or someone. Your heart thuds like a war drum. The guards signal to prepare for entry. You're not doing a full raid, just a controlled, intimidating visit. Mongol intelligence often use psychological pressure to keep regions in check. Appear suddenly, demand answers, leave uncertainty behind. It's terrifyingly effective. You descend into the village at a trot, cloaks fluttering, faces stern. You keep your mouth shut and try to look like you know what you're doing. The locals freeze. The digging men bolt, but not far. They're surrounded in seconds. Interrogation in Mongol culture isn't all thumbscrews and scream tents. Often it's social pressure shaming or leveraging internal rivalries. The senior Kashig asks calm, low questions. Who was buried? Why? Where is your tribute? Why did you stop sending messages? Turns out the village elder died and the new leader hasn't quite figured out the paperwork. Also, they're broke. Like our goats ran off and the barley froze broke, no rebellion, no enemy scout. Just rural dysfunction. Still, your team inspects every yurt. You enter one that smells like fermented despair. There's a family cooking gruel and eyeing you like you might arrest their soup. You nod awkwardly and back out. But not all visits are so innocent. A second yurt reveals something peculiar. Foreign coins. Chinese, maybe. You flip one over, squint at the intricate square hole. Someone's been trading under the table. The senior Kushik doesn't raise his voice. He simply holds the coin up, lets the villagers stew in their own guilt. No punishment yet, but a message is clear: we see you. This was the Mongol way: constant awareness, omnipresent surveillance, without having to physically be everywhere. Fear wasn't a side effect of the empire, it was part of the operating system. You mount up again as your team prepares to leave. The villagers are left rattled but not punished. Not today. The goal wasn't blood, it was information, control, and you are exhausted. You didn't swing a sword or fire an arrow, but you feel wrung out like you've just read every line of fine print on a contract in candlelight. Psychological tension has its own weight. On the ride back, your blinkless companion finally breaks his silence. You did okay, he says, which is high praise from a guy who hasn't moved his eyebrows all day. You didn't faint. You didn't talk. You nod. Modest victories. That night you debrief with the officer in charge. You describe the digging the coin, the general vibe of fear and sadness. He listens carefully, then says something that sticks. Everyone lies, but fear tells the truth. You don't sleep much that night. Not from fear, though there's that sure, but from the realization that this army doesn't just conquer with steel and fire. It conquers with eyes, with memory, with silence until it becomes thunder. You sip some arag to settle your nerves. It doesn't work. Greg snores next to you, blissfully unaware of coin conspiracies and psychological warfare. You envy him. You close your eyes, finally drifting off to a dream where you interrogate a sheep who knows too much. It refuses to talk. You wake smiling. When the bugle made of horn blares at dawn, you groan. Not because it's loud, but because you know what day it is. Logistics Day. Mongol edition. Which means you'll be spending the next several hours tangled in rope-counting bags of grain, and if you're lucky, learning the ancient art of making things not fall off a moving cart. There's no glory in supply lines, no horses leaping over fire, no arrows whizzing past ears, just oxen sweat and whatever passes for accounting in the 13th century. But if you thought the Mongol Empire was built only on warfare, surprise behind every blood-soaked conquest was a very stressed man trying to balance a ledger while being bitten by flies. You're pulled from your yurt and shoved toward the supply tent where a squat man with 3 fingers and the personality of cold porridge gives you your first task. Unload sacks of millet and reweigh them. Apparently someone's been skimming rations again. You heft a bag. It feels like it contains rocks, betrayal, and your future back problems. The Mongols, for all their brutal efficiency on the battlefield, were deeply reliant on the logistics network that followed their armies like a second shadow. Every campaign had to account for food, water tools, spare horses, extra bows, and even writing materials. Yes, they had clerks on campaign. Imagine conquering Poland and then filling out expense reports. You soon discover something curious. Mongol wagons or karach aren't like clunky European carts. They're sturdy, flexible, and can even be disassembled quickly. Some even have felt coverings, portable yurts on wheels. And they're not pulled by horses. No Mongols knew better. Oxen did the hard hauling while the horses did the fancy dancing. Your job: help reconfigure one of the heavier wagons for a long-range supply run. That means checking the wheel joints, tightening leather bindings, and balancing weight to avoid tipping over during rough terrain. It's basically IKEA meets survival mode. You work alongside a couple of teenagers who seem to know more about wagons than you ever will. One of them whistles constantly. The other teaches you a trick: stack heavier goods toward the axle to reduce strain on the yoke. This blows your mind a little. Balance is everything he says. Unbalanced loads kill more than arrows, which sounds like something a Mongol Marie Kondo would say. You help load sacks of dried meat boards, blocks of cheese, and barrels of fermented mare's milk. All of it must survive extreme cold, rattling roads and hungry rats with Olympic climbing skills. Mongol armies often brought their own food supplies across vast distances, sometimes even building mobile slaughterhouses when large herds followed the troops. Historians still argue whether these supply herds were officially organized by rank. or just a chaotic mess herded by brave fools with sticks and hope. Either way, they worked. One quirky thing you notice: the Mongols also transport spiritual items. Ritual stones, carved totems, even bundled eagle feathers. These weren't luxuries, they were necessities for morale and tradition. You see a small shrine affixed to a supply cart, adorned with beads and bones. It's for a war god, you're told. No one dares touch it without permission. At midday, you stop for a ration check. The quartermaster reads names from a list and hands out portions. Mongol units lived by a tightly controlled ration system. If you're marching, you get more. If you're injured, you get soft food. If you're lazy, you get yelled at. You're portioned 2 biscuits that taste like sadness and dust and a sliver of dried meat. You chew slowly, trying to make it last longer than a TikTok. Then comes the fun part: animal maintenance. See, supply lines don't just carry food for people, they carry food for the horses. Mongol cavalry might swap horses multiple times a day, rotating through their personal herd to keep each animal fresh. This meant huge logistical coordination. Each horse needed grain, water, rest, and grooming. Like athletes with hooves, you're handed a bucket and told to wash Greg's legs. Greg is delighted, you less so. He kicks mud onto your shirt. You begin to suspect he does this on purpose. Someone nearby starts shouting. A yoke strap just snapped on one of the wagons. A wheel wobbles. There's a mad scramble to catch it before it topples. You leap in and help lift the load while another soldier lashes the frame with emergency rope. A near disaster, but also a valuable lesson in the Mongol war machine failure. It isn't just about losing a battle. It's about running out of oats 200 miles from home, or your wheel catching fire in enemy territory, or someone forgetting to pack the tent poles. Logistics is where empires die quietly. To give credit where it's due, the Mongols were terrifyingly good at preventing those quiet deaths. They organized Ordu mobile supply units with assigned captains. They pre-scouted water sources. They sometimes carried kumis and skin bladders so soldiers could stay hydrated while galloping. Mongol command even mapped routes with fallback camps. You overhear 2 officers arguing about an upcoming resupply rendezvous. One wants to go west through a dried riverbed. The other insists the eastern hills have fewer bandits. You catch the word relay post and perk up. Mongol armies used an early form of postal relay yam stations set up along major routes. Riders could swap out exhausted horses and carry messages lightning fast across thousands of miles. Genghis Khan turned communication into a weapon. Some couriers rode with a pass called a garage, giving them food, shelter, and access to fresh mounts. Think Amazon Prime, but for news of who's about to be conquered. By late afternoon, you're helping prepare a wagon convoy for tomorrow's movement. Every cart is checked, every wheel reinforced. Even the angle of the axles is adjusted. The head quartermaster walks past and mutters, "A stable wheel is a stable world." You're not sure if it's wisdom or just poetic whining. You finally sit, cracking your knuckles and watching the sun dip low. A boy comes by with a water skin and an enormous potato. You trade your last cheese cube for the potato. No regrets. Your hands are blistered. Your knees are coated in wagon grease. But you've learned something: the Mongols didn't win because they charged harder. They won because they got their fed fresh and 5 minutes early. You glance at the horizon. The wind kicks up dust. Somewhere far off, another army is moving. And somewhere behind that, a tired teenager is probably tying a barrel of milk to a wagon and wondering what it all means. Greg snorts behind you. You lean back against his flank. For once, he doesn't try to sit on you. And for just a moment in the soft breeze, you feel something like peace. You wake up to a familiar smell, no, not the comforting scent of roasted grain or even Greg's hay-laced breath. This is something smokier, thicker. You sit up in your bedroll and realize the whole camp is already a swarm of activity. Today's the day you've been dreading ever since you first picked up a bow with your arms trembling and your ego fragile. It's the dreaded test of endurance and marksmanship, Mongol ranged combat drills. The air is cold but not sharp, just enough chill to make your breath mist and your fingers stiff. Not ideal for holding a bowstring, but that's the point. In Mongol warcraft, you didn't get to fight in perfect weather with ideal light and a hot latte. You shuffle to the training grounds where warriors are already riding in circles, loosing arrows at straw targets, shaped like unfortunate soldiers. Some of them are on galloping horses. Others practice with composite bows, pulling with the kind of control that makes you wonder if their arms are made of braided cable. Your instructor today is a woman with biceps like an ox and a voice like thunder filtered through sarcasm. She tells you today's goal is simple: hit the target, while moving at full gallop, while not dying. You glance at Greg, who does not appear thrilled by this news. Mongol archery was a terrifying science. Their composite bows were made of wood horn and sinew glued together and curved into deadly instruments of absurd range. A good archer could hit a man-sized target from 300 meters away while moving. These weren't just hunting tools, they were war's favorite whisper. You're handed a bow that feels heavier than it looks. It has a tight, almost angry snap when you string it, and the instructor tells you not to overthink the draw, just let your shoulder and spine do the work. Which would be easier advice to follow if you weren't suddenly imagining your shoulder separating from your body? The first round is stationary. You stand feet planted in the soft earth and try to draw. It takes a second. Your first arrow wobbles in the air and lands somewhere near the general postal code of the target. A merciful grunt from the instructor. Then it's time to mount up. You climb onto Greg and ride in slow circles, practicing your balance while drawing the bow. Mongol warriors trained from childhood to shoot in 360 degrees from horseback. They'd loop behind enemy lines, turn in the saddle and fire, while retreating, a move called the Parthian shot. Mongols perfected it and used it to outmaneuver armies twice their size. You try this. It doesn't go great. You spin halfway, Greg stumbles, and you nearly shoot your own saddle. You're improving, someone yells, clearly lying. You manage a few decent shots before lunch when the drills pause for a moment of boiled dumplings and a hot drink that might be tea or melted sadness. You sit on a log, fingers sore, lips chapped, body buzzing from adrenaline. The woman next to you, an older soldier with a silver earring and a laugh, like gravel, tells you that some warriors used to carry up to 60 arrows in multiple quivers. Enough to ruin someone's whole lineage, she adds, half joking. You nod like you totally knew that. One quirky tidbit comes up during the break. Mongols often practiced archery using singing arrows, arrows with holes or whistles carved in the shaft that made eerie sounds when they flew. Sometimes to terrify enemies, sometimes just for fun. You imagine a battlefield full of howling arrows and decide that sleep may never come again. After the break, things get harder. You're asked to fire at moving targets. A couple of your fellow recruits strap hay bundles to a sled and drag it across the field. You have to hit it while riding parallel. This time you get a few clean releases. One even lands in the target with a satisfying thump. You nearly cry. Your instructor walks past and mutters, "That'll do. For a beginner." Then she snorts. Don't get cocky. The real challenge is next. You've seen others do it. Now it's your turn. The double release run. You'll gallop from one end of the course to the other, turning to fire once forward and once backward. Think. Joust meets carnival ride meets performance anxiety. Greg takes off faster than expected. You line up the shot, heart-hammering arms tense, and loose the arrow. It arcs beautifully, then thunks into the ground 2 feet short. You panic spin, drawing another arrow as Greg reaches the course's midpoint. You twist, release, whap, and hit the target clean from behind. The camp erupts into scattered claps and a few surprised whistles. Someone even offers you half a dried plum and congratulations. You take it like it's a medal. Historians still argue whether Mongol archers fired more accurately than their contemporaries, or simply created chaos so thoroughly that precision didn't matter. Either way, Mongol archery wasn't just about killing. It was about control, dominating the rhythm of battle, creating fear before a blade was even drawn. By evening, you're limp. You've learned how to balance while drawing fire at speed, and survive a training exercise without Greg running you through a fence. Victory. You sit near the firearms, sore, watching the shadows dance across the training field. A boy to your left is whittling arrowheads. Another is oiling his bowstring. You realize these aren't just weapons, they're extensions of the body, of culture, of memory. The Mongols didn't worship the bow, but they may as well have. Without it, there'd be no empire, no terror in Europe, no whispered legends about the horsemen who shot like gods and vanished like smoke. You lay back on your bedroll, letting the ache settle. Your hands are raw, your eyes heavy, but somewhere inside, you're proud. Today, you hit a target on horseback. Tomorrow, maybe you hit two. Greg yawns beside you, then farts. You pretend it's the wind. You dream you're flying. Not just galloping through fields or chasing some deer across the steppe, you're actually soaring through the air bow in hand arrows, streaming behind you like comets. And just as you draw back to strike the moon itself, you wake up and immediately regret it. Because today, your dream of flying is about to be tested on the long, miserable, jostling road of Mongol military travel. That's right, it's marching day, and you're going to learn firsthand how the Mongols moved entire armies across thousands of miles without Google Maps roadside diners or the will to live. The first thing you notice, no one's rushing, which is weird because you expected a dramatic cavalry charge toward glory. Instead, the entire movement looks more like a well-oiled conveyor belt of nomadic efficiency. Wagons roll out first, herds of sheep and goats follow behind, scouts vanish into the horizon, and the soldiers? They just fall into formation like they've been doing this forever. Spoiler, they kind of have. A Mongol army on the move wasn't just a bunch of guys walking in the same direction. It was a synchronized dance of logistics discipline and deeply uncomfortable saddles. You mount Greg, who seems unusually chipper today. Probably because you're the one doing all the work while he gets snacks every few miles. The formation is unlike anything you've ever seen. Units are divided not just by size, but by job. Some groups protect the wagons. Others stay near the command tent, which is mobile, of course. And then there are the flanking riders, scouts, and skirmishers constantly scanning the horizon like caffeinated meerkats. Historians still argue whether these formations were always fixed or adapted based on terrain and season. What's certain, though, is that this wasn't a rabble of horsemen, it was an organism. Each part moved with purpose, even if the soldiers didn't always know what the purpose was. You pass by a squad of engineers who are mapping terrain with stick string and what looks like a very confused falcon. They wave. You wave back. The falcon stares through your soul. As the march begins, the rules become painfully clear. No stopping unless ordered. No overtaking the officer in front of you. No stray arrows. And definitely no singing unless you're the one allowed to sing. Hint, you're not. Despite the strict structure, the pace is manageable about 25 to 30 miles a day. That's enough to cover serious ground without wearing out the horses. The trick, rotating your mounts. Mongol warriors typically brought 3 to 5 horses apiece and switched between them during the day. Today, however, you only have Greg, and Greg is smug about it. Somewhere mid-morning, your saddle starts to feel like a medieval torture device. You shift, you squirm, you try folding a rag under your leg. Nothing helps. Someone next to you suggests standing in the stirrups for a few minutes to stretch. You try that and immediately cramp up like a dried apricot. The terrain shifts slowly, rolling hills, then scrubland, then a stretch of hard-packed sand that rattles your teeth. The Mongols rarely stuck to beaten paths. They followed rivers herded toward resources and avoided heavily forested zones when possible. And when they hit a tricky spot like swamps or mountains, they adapted, quickly, often brutally. One story you overhear during the ride, a Mongol column once disassembled their carts and swam them across a river using inflated hides as flotation. Some even strapped goats to their backs for warmth. You wonder how warm that really was. Probably smelled like ambition and goat pee. Around midday, there's a short halt for water and grazing. You drop down from Greg like a sack of grain and immediately begin inspecting your knees to make sure they still exist. A field medic walks by handing out dried horse jerky and some kind of herbal tea that tastes faintly of moss and regret. During the break, you notice something odd. The officers don't shout. There's almost no yelling. Orders pass quietly sometimes through hand signals. The Mongols prized discipline, yes, but also noise control. They believed a silent army was a deadly one. You hear a whisper and suddenly 5 carts shift position like chess pieces on a giant game board. And then just as quickly you're moving again. The afternoon is hotter. Dust kicks up in waves. Your scarf helps, but not much. Your lips crack, your eyes sting, and every breath tastes like scorched earth. You realize too late that no one gave you a map, because maps are for commanders. You just follow the guy in front of you and hope he knows what he's doing. Spoiler, he's been asleep in the saddle for 20 minutes. Despite the discomfort, there's an eerie beauty to it all. Lines of horses stretch across the plain. Their riders barely speak. Birds wheel overhead. In the distance, a group of archers practice shooting while riding sideways just to stay sharp. A herd of sheep meanders nearby, bleating at nothing in particular. It's like a dream. A very sore, itchy, bug-filled dream. You ask someone about marching songs. They shrug and say most warriors keep their minds busy with internal chants, quiet prayers, or imaginary arguments with their commanders. Some even chew leather strips to pass the time. You try it. It's awful. By the time evening settles in, you've covered nearly 30 miles. And you feel every step of it. The camp begins to form again quickly, efficiently, with yurts popping up like mushrooms after rain. The wagons form a semicircle. Fires are lit. Horses are unsaddled and brushed, and you just lie down in the grass and wonder how your ancestors did this without physical therapy. But as you gaze up at the darkening sky, a strange sense of accomplishment settles in your chest. You didn't fall off, Greg. You didn't lose the column. You didn't even cry out loud. Sure, you're chafed, sunburnt, and probably developing a saddle-shaped dent in your pelvis, but you made it. You marched with the army. You were part of the machine. And the best part, you get to do it all again tomorrow. It's still dark when someone kicks your boot. Not aggressively, but with enough casual indifference to suggest that sleeping in is no longer part of your life. You groan roll over and find a bowl of fermented mare's milk shoved into your hands. Congratulations, you've been volunteered for scouting duty. Today, you're not just another rider in the slow churn of the army's movement. Today, you're a pair of eyes for the Khan. You mount Greg, who's somehow both sleepy and annoyed, and join a small group of hardened scouts already preparing to ride out ahead of the column. They wear fewer layers than most soldiers, their saddlebags are light, and their expressions suggest they've seen enough sunrises to never trust one. Your task sounds simple right ahead. Observe the terrain, look for signs of enemy activity, and return alive. Emphasis on that last part. Mongol scouts were legendary for their speed independence and supernatural sense of direction. They could ride for days without maps, navigating by stars, landmarks, and the shape of riverbanks. You're just trying to remember which way is north. You set off at dawn, moving fast and quiet across a pale landscape of open plains, broken only by distant hills and clusters of trees. Your leader, a wiry man with a scar shaped like a question mark, rides a shaggy chestnut pony that moves like it's gliding. He doesn't speak unless necessary. When he does, it's short, crisp commands spread out. Stay low. Fox trail old. It becomes immediately clear that being a scout isn't about bravado. It's about watching, listening, reading the ground like a book. You learn quickly that certain broken grass can mean a recent passage. Horse droppings. Age, quantity, and shape tell a story. Smudged footprints on a stream bed could be travelers, could be ambush bait. Historians still argue whether Mongol scouts operated solo or in small squads most of the time. But what's clear is that their reports shaped the path of entire armies. A missed detail could lead to an ambush. An overreaction could waste weeks. The pressure is very real, and Greg doesn't help by stopping to sniff every bush. You break off from the group briefly to investigate a cluster of rocks. The ground there feels wrong, disturbed. Your hand brushes over what looks like a buried horseshoe. When you call over your leader, he squints at it, shrugs, and marks it with a stick. Old, maybe travelers, not our problem. You pretend you totally knew that. Throughout the day, you ride far ahead of the army. You learn to read the wind to smell fire before you see smoke, and to tell the difference between a hunting camp and a military outpost just by how the wood is stacked. Mongol scouts weren't just fast, they were analysts on horseback. And quirky fact of the day, they sometimes used falcons as reconnaissance partners. Not to send messages like in fairy tales, but to detect motion. A bird suddenly banking left could mean movement nearby. Some scouts even wore tiny bells on their saddles, not to make noise, but to stop hearing them in case they were stolen or lost. That's right, if your bell isn't ringing, something is very wrong. Around noon, your group stops to rest at a small rise overlooking a wide, flat valley. You're told to eat quickly dried meat flatbread and something called arag jerky, which you suspect is just regular jerky that's been judged by an angry grandmother. Tastes like regret and dust. As you chew, the scout leader points into the valley. He says this is where a Mongol army once tricked an enemy force by setting up dummy fires at night, hundreds of small campfires to make their army seem larger. The real force flanked from the other side by morning. You nod, thinking of how much effort that must have taken. He shrugs and mutters, "Fire's easier than fighting." Later in the day, you find a suspicious line of flattened grass. It arcs in a strange curve along a ridge. You follow it for a while before realizing it's a trail used by messengers, those elite riders known as the Yam couriers. These riders could switch horses at relay stations every few miles and cover hundreds of miles in days. One theory says Mongol scouts often doubled as Yam riders, collecting intelligence and relaying it to generals through coded knots in cords or subtle marks on parchment. Others argue the two roles were separate entirely, with scouts being more embedded in field ops. Either way, your backside is now entirely numb and your knees feel like they're made of unoiled hinges. Late afternoon brings a new challenge: potential contact. Your group spots a column of dust rising in the distance. Could be enemy scouts, could be a herd of something wild. Either way, your team shifts into high gear. You spread out, you ride low. Every movement feels tenser. You ride up a ridge and peer over. Relief washes over you. It's a herd of wild asses. The animal kind, not the invading army kind. Still, the scouts take no chances. They signal back to the army with a small mirror flash and a strip of yellow cloth tied to a bush. Coded signs. To an outsider, it's just decoration. To the army, it's a situational update. As evening falls, you return to camp, dusty, windburned, and smelling like horse spit and fear. Your team is quiet. No high fives, no stories around the fire. Just shared glances, a few nods, and a long, slow exhale. Scouting isn't about heroics. It's about not being seen, not being wrong, and not dying in a ditch 50 miles from help. You curl up under your wool blanket, eyes fluttering shut, and realize you learned more in one day of riding than in a week of training. You learned that the land speaks, and that Mongol scouts. They knew how to listen. Morning arrives with the cheerful sound of someone vomiting near the livestock. Charming. You roll over wishing you could mute the world, but the sun is already clawing its way across the sky. No rest for the conquered, because today you're being reassigned. Not to the cavalry or the cooks or even Greg's grooming squad. No, today you're working with the messengers. The Yam, as they're called, is the Mongol Empire's postal network, though postal network makes it sound like something involving polite uniforms and stamps. In truth, this is a screaming fast relay system that could move intelligence orders and maybe the occasional shopping list across thousands of miles with terrifying efficiency. Think of it as FedEx on horseback, minus the customer service and with slightly more blood. You're handed a pouch with coded message knots, each string and twist representing a different order. And just like that, you're no longer just someone pretending to survive the Mongol army. You're a vital piece of its communications web. The system works like this: riders don't gallop straight across the empire. That would kill both them and the horses. Instead, a network of way stations called ortos are spaced roughly 25 to 30 miles apart, stocked with fresh horses' food and sometimes replacement riders. These way stations are the beating heart of Mongol command and control. You saddle up again and head toward the nearest station. The trail is dusty but marked. You're told to follow the burned stick markers and avoid anything that smells like deliberate silence. That's scout code for ambush possibility. Comforting. Historians still argue how formalized the yam system was under Genghis versus later Khans like Ogadai or Kublai. Some claim it was already remarkably sophisticated during Genghis's campaigns. Others think it evolved more slowly, layering over existing tribal practices. What isn't debated? The results. Messages flew across Asia faster than most medieval armies could react. After an hour of riding, you arrive at the first Urtu. It's not much, just a few yurts, a fenced pen of twitchy horses, and a sleepy-looking boy holding what might be bread or a very stale shoe. The station keeper takes your pouch, checks the knots, and barks something in Mongolian. A new rider already saddled grabs the fresh pouch and is off before you can even say, "Wait, was that important?" You sit stunned. The entire transfer took less than a minute. These people have Starbucks lines beat by a country mile. Curious, you explore the station. One quirky detail. Some way stations also served as intelligence hubs, where local spies or informants left coded items like carved bone pieces or folded reeds to signal things like troop movement or shortages. You pick up what you think is one of these and immediately drop it when someone shouts in your direction. You remount Greg and continue. Today your job isn't to deliver the message, it's to trail the route. Observe how it functions and report inefficiencies to a superior officer later. You're not entirely sure who that is. Hopefully someone with low expectations. The second leg of the route is through flatter terrain, perfect for speed. Mongol courier ponies, smaller, hardier than Western war horses, eat up the distance. You try to keep pace, but Greg, bless him, is no racehorse. You do learn that some elite couriers would change horses up to 10 times a day to maintain top speed. Your thighs hurt just thinking about it. At the next station, you're offered a bowl of hot milk and some terrifyingly salty cheese. Apparently this is hospitality. You smile, chew, and try not to cry. An old man gestures to a leather scroll hanging in the station. It's a record of riders who passed through when and how long they stayed. Each name is marked with little red or black lines. According to local tradition, black meant the rider was late. You glance at your own time. You're not just late. You're the ghost of late. One of the messengers tells you that high-level military orders like sudden withdrawals or pivots were sometimes delivered in duplicate or triplicate in case one rider was killed en route. And the worst thing you could do as a messenger: lose your pouch. Losing a message under Genghis Khan was considered one step above betraying the army. There are rumors of messengers being sewn into horse carcasses for punishment. You hope those are just rumors. Probably, maybe. A fringe theory you overhear. Some yam riders may have used whistling codes across open terrain to signal station readiness or rider approach, especially in mountainous areas where sound traveled further than messengers did. It's speculative but oddly poetic. You keep riding, stopping briefly at each station to observe, take notes, and try not to fall asleep in the saddle. The operations blur together: fresh horses, fast hands, almost no talking. It's like the Empire runs on an invisible bloodstream, pulsing orders from the steppes to distant corners of Asia. One memorable stop, a station with a particularly large yurt. Inside is not just a keeper, but a small group of officials huddled over maps. Apparently, this station doubles as a tactical node. They're rerouting messages in real time based on scout updates. You ask a timid question and are met with a long, squinting stare. Then a bowl of curds is shoved into your hands. Communication received. Late in the day, as you ride into the last station on your assigned route, you spot something odd: a rider with an elaborate helmet, clearly high-ranking, handing over a tightly bound scroll. You're told to stay quiet and watch. That scroll contains battlefield orders from a Khan's general. The message will change how an entire flank moves tomorrow. Suddenly, the YAM system doesn't just feel like a neat trick. It feels like the spine of the Mongol war machine. Without it, the army would be blind, deaf, and dumb. With it, they could command from thousands of miles away, adjusting like a snake mid-strike. As the sun dips below the horizon and your eyelids grow heavier, you curl up in a borrowed yurt, the scent of hot milk and horsehair clinging to everything. You're still not fast. You're definitely not efficient. But for one strange day, you were part of the whispering pulse that moved the empire forward. And you didn't even lose the pouch. You wake up tangled in a blanket that smells like boiled leather and disappointment. Outside, dawn splits the sky into stripes of orange and gray. You stretch groaning as the clatter of hooves starts up again. No more courier duty for now. Today, you're back with the logistics crew, the unsung heroes who somehow make sure that thousands of men, women, horses, goats, and bags of dried mystery meat don't starve or strangle each other in the wilderness. And yes, it's exactly as glamorous as it sounds. You're led toward a line of ox-drawn carts creaking under the weight of grain sacks, spare saddles, wooden planks, and the occasional barrel that probably contains salted fish or fermented disaster. The Mongol army isn't known for hauling luxury, but what they do have is an efficient, brutally practical supply system that makes sure everything gets where it needs to go just in time to not ruin everything. Today, you're assigned to Pack Unit B, which seems to consist of 3 grizzled men, 2 sarcastic teenagers, and an elderly woman who mutters at her mule like it owes her money. You ask what your job is. The old woman hands you a rope and points at a groaning cart. Great! You're a cart puller now. Greg eyes you like he's getting a break. As you trudge alongside the slow-moving caravan, you realize the true genius of Mongol logistics isn't in what they carry, it's in what they don't. You see, the Mongol army didn't rely on long, fragile supply lines like European forces of the time. They moved light-lived off the land and carried only what they couldn't steal forage or ferment. That meant dried meat, hard cheese milk curds, and air-rag fermented mare's milk again, in case you were missing that fizzy yogurt nightmare. Mainstream historians agree that the Mongols were logistical minimalists. Every soldier carried supplies on their person or horse. Large wagons like the one you're currently suffering next to were usually reserved for reserve gear siege components or the all-important yurt poles. But here's the fringe tidbit. Some believe Mongol engineers designed special collapsible carts with shock-absorbing suspension using braided leather. Think early suspension systems not for comfort, but to reduce damage to valuable goods. You look at your current cart, 3 wooden wheels, and a bolt held in place by dried goat sinew, and think, maybe not this one. Midday, the caravan stops for a brief break. Fires are lit. Water is boiled. Someone throws dried vegetables into a pot, and the smell is both tempting and vaguely alarming. You're told to gather dung for the fire. Yes, dung. Dried animal waste was the preferred fuel source on the steppe-abundant, slow-burning and surprisingly efficient. You pinch a pile between 2 sticks and try not to gag. Honestly, it's not the worst job you've done this week. You spend the afternoon learning how supplies are distributed. Not just food, but spare arrows, extra boughs fabric for tent repairs, and something called winter fat. A dense brick of tallow and oats issued to soldiers for cold weather endurance. Soldiers were expected to be shockingly self-sufficient, but the army kept these caches for extreme conditions. There's a debate among historians about just how centralized Mongol logistics were. Did every unit handle its own supply dispersal? Or were there higher command nodes tracking what went where? Some scholars point to Chinese records from the Yuan dynasty describing inventory clerks within the Mongol command structure. Others argue that Mongol mobility depended more on delegation and trust than on spreadsheets. You're inclined to believe the latter, because no one here is counting anything. They're eyeballing sacks, shouting numbers that may or may not be real, and occasionally bartering cheese for socks. One clever system, though, is how they mark spoilage. Food sacks are sometimes wrapped with different colored twine. Red for use, soon black for, has outlived 3 Khans, and white for don't open without a priest. It's not standardized, but you learn to ask before you dig in. By late afternoon, the caravan merges with the main column again. You pass herds of sheep and goats, yes, part of the mobile food supply. Mongol armies often traveled with their own livestock. It wasn't just for meat. Sheep provided wool, goats gave milk, and in dire cases, either could provide blood drawn without killing the animal. It's called a bloodletting, and while it sounds medieval and horrifying, it's technically nutritious. You're reassured it's rarely done. Still, you eye the sheep a little differently now. As you help unload bundles at the latest temporary camp, you stumble upon a group of craftsmen, blacksmiths, fletchers, and leather workers who travel with the army. Turns out logistics isn't just about feeding people, it's also about maintaining gear. You watch a blacksmith hammer out arrowheads using a mobile forge, basically a metal bowl of fire strapped to a donkey. It's ingenious if smoky. One leather worker shows you how to waterproof boots using a mixture of sheep fat and ash. It smells like a haunted kitchen, but the boots come out almost impervious to water. Mongol soldiers didn't wait for gear to fall apart. They fixed it mid-march, sometimes mid-battle. You even spot an iron mold used for casting replacement stirrups on the go. Portable manufacturing in the 13th century. And I think you once got frustrated trying to assemble a bookshelf with an Allen key. As evening comes and the wagons are circled to form a makeshift barrier, the supply team sets up camp with quiet efficiency. Fires are built, food is rationed, horses are hobbled. You sit with your fellow haulers quietly gnawing on something that might be meat, might be bark. Hard to say. No one talks much. Logistics isn't glorious, but it's the spine of survival. In fact, here's the real sleep-deprived revelation Mongol armies could conquer half the known world not just because they were ruthless and fast, but because they never ran out of socks, arrows, or calories. Your legs throb. Your arms ache. You smell like a smoked animal. But you've seen the veins beneath the muscle of the empire. And they're powered by horses, dung fires, and that terrifying cheese. You roll over onto your blanket listening to the creak of leather straps, the grunt of oxen settling down, and the soft wind brushing against 100 supply carts. And you realize it's not the warriors who make an empire last. It's the people who move the stuff. You wake to the thump of footsteps and the unmistakable sound of someone sharpening a blade with a whetstone far too close to your head. Soothing. Today's role doesn't involve stabbing or getting stabbed, at least not directly. You're moving into a part of Mongol army life that most people overlook completely: medical care and battlefield cleanup. You're drafted into this cheerful role not because of your impressive resume, which mostly consists of "didn't die yesterday," but because the camp medic needs someone to carry water-boiled linens and hold the twitchy ones down. You're not sure what that means, but you nod politely and hope it involves minimal twitching on your part. The Mongols weren't known for having dedicated field hospitals like you might find in modern armies, but don't mistake that for neglect. Instead of grand facilities, they used a blend of practical first aid folk medicine and borrowed knowledge from the many cultures they conquered. Chinese, Persian, Turkic, and more. If it worked, it stayed. If it didn't, well, the soldier probably didn't either. Your first job? Haul water from a nearby stream. Easy, right? Except the stream is half a mile away, the buckets are wooden, and one has a suspicious leak. You slosh your way back soaked and grumpy, only to find the medic boiling crushed tree bark in a pot of milk. Apparently, this is a poultice for infected wounds. You suppress a gag. It smells like someone melted a haunted library. He hands you a set of bone needles and sinew thread. Not to sew anything, just to hold. He's got stitching to do and wants you to watch and learn. The soldier on the receiving end of this impromptu surgery is biting down on a strip of leather, his arm flayed open like a rolled-up rug. You blink. He nods at you. You nod back. There's a bond now, mostly fear-based. One mainstream historical fact here: Mongol soldiers were actually quite well versed in basic trauma care. They could cauterize wounds using hot iron clean cuts with alcohol from fermented grains or fruits, and splint broken limbs with surprising precision. Recovery wasn't guaranteed, but survival wasn't just luck. It was often skill. Still, historians debate just how much centralized medical knowledge the Mongol army carried between units. Some argue for designated healers trained in traditional Mongol and Chinese medicine. Others say most care was handled peer-to-peer, soldier helping soldier with whatever herbs or substances were on hand. You look at the soldier being sewn together with one hand while the other holds a bowl of curd, and figure it's probably both. You spend the next few hours sterilizing crude instruments, mostly with fire or vinegar, rolling bandages and dabbing bruises with a pungent mint paste that stings like betrayal. You meet a young medic who swears by powdered deer antler for muscle recovery. Another insists that spider webs stop bleeding faster than anything else. He keeps them in a tiny leather pouch like prized silk. You decide not to ask what happens if the spiders are still home. And then there's battlefield cleanup. Oh, yes, the part after the part where people fall down and stop moving. Mongol battles didn't leave behind pristine meadows. After the clash came the sorting salvaging weapons, tending the wounded, burying or burning the dead. You're not quite trusted with corpses yet, thankfully, but you do get assigned to the salvage crew. You follow a line of riders and ox carts out to yesterday's skirmish site. The field is a mess, arrows like tall grass bits of torn cloth, cracked shields and the occasional helmet still cradling part of its last owner. The air is thick with iron and smoke. A vulture lands near you and eyes your boot. You step back politely. Your job is to gather reusable gear arrows, armor plates, even buckles and straps. Mongol warfare was practical. Nothing went to waste. Broken arrowheads are collected to be reforged. Tattered leather can become binding for tools. You're even told to snatch up bones. For what you ask soup, someone jokes, then pauses. Maybe not joking. Quirky details some Mongol units supposedly carried small dogs not as mascots, but for pest control and if desperate meat. One cleanup worker says dogs can also sniff out wounded enemies hiding under bodies. You laugh. He doesn't. You laugh less. A fringe theory you hear that afternoon involves battlefield incense. A few scholars think the Mongols sometimes burned juniper or wormwood near triage tents, not just for spiritual reasons, but to cover the smell of blood and deter insects. It sounds plausible, especially when the medic starts tossing dried herbs onto a small fire with a look of both purpose and panic. There's another argument historians can't quite resolve. Did the Mongols bury their own fallen in formal ceremonies? Or was it more ad hoc evidence suggests both? Elite warriors might get ritual burials with mourning songs, but most common soldiers were probably laid in mass graves, often burned, or buried quickly to prevent disease. You help dig one of those graves. It's not poetic. It's not solemn. It's muddy hard and full of awkward silences. But there's a kind of grim respect to it. No one speaks ill of the dead. No one jokes, at least not loudly. When it's done, the medic says a few words in Mongolian you don't understand, places a rock on the mound, and walks away. At sunset back in camp, the wounded are quiet. Some sleep. Others mutter fever dreams. You pass out curdled milk and soft bread and get a thumbs up from one soldier with half a bandage on his face. You nod back proud. You're not a doctor, but you're less squeamish than you were yesterday. That counts. You clean your hands in a basin of vinegar and stream water scrub until the red turns to pink, then pink to pale. It still smells like iron. You'll carry that scent a while. And as you lie on your cot, the moans of healing men echoing softly around you, you think about how even the world's deadliest army still bleeds. Still limps. Still leans on strangers with trembling fingers. Tonight the Empire rests, and so do its healers. You wake before the sun again, this time not to the clanging of armor or the gurgle of boiling bark paste, but to the rising rhythmic chant of Mongol throat singing somewhere nearby. It vibrates the air low, ghostly, and strange. For a moment you wonder if you've died and wandered into a throat-singing afterlife. But no. It's just ritual morning prep, today's lesson in how the Mongol army combined superstition, spiritual rites, and battlefield psychology to stay terrifying and, more impressively, functionally sane. Your new assignment is with the unit shaman. Great. Nothing like starting the day by apprenticing to a guy who carries a pouch of eagle feathers, several bones, and a drum carved from the skin of something you'd rather not ask about. His name is Boka, and he nods without smiling as if he already knows how bad you are at spiritual attunement. The morning begins with incense smoke made from burning juniper, and fat wafted toward the eastern sky. Boka chants softly in Old Mongolian, while waving his drum in slow circles. You're instructed to sprinkle millet into the fire and whisper thanks to the eternal blue sky. You fumble the words. The millet catches fire. Boca doesn't look surprised. See, in the Mongol worldview, especially before large-scale conversion to Buddhism or Islam, the sky wasn't just the weather. It was divine. Tengri, the sky god, was considered the supreme power above khans and empires. The will of the sky governed everything from weather to battle outcomes. And yes, your spiritual alignment this morning might determine whether your tent collapses later. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Mongol soldiers routinely participated in spiritual rituals before campaigns, including offerings, chanting, and symbolic gestures to protect themselves and curse enemies. These weren't casual habits, they were deeply embedded into military discipline. You're handed a carved talisman, a wooden knot shaped like a bird in flight, and told to wear it close to your chest. It's for protection, or fertility, or possibly both. You don't ask questions. By mid-morning, the army is beginning one of its favorite drills, synchronized riding formations. You're temporarily off the horse roster. Greg the sarcastic gelding has been reassigned, probably to torment someone else, so you join the observation detail with a small team of officers. One of them explains that spiritual and psychological strength were as vital to Mongol warfare as horses or bows. Before every campaign, omens were checked via animal entrails weather patterns and the dreams of certain chosen shamans. If a hawk flew left instead of right, the entire battle plan could be altered. It's superstition, but also strategy. Belief sharpens morale. Doubt kills it. You watch as the soldiers ride in a slow-moving arrowhead formation, hooves kicking up dust like smoke signals. Each rider is stone-faced. Some chant softly as they go, invoking ancestor spirits, or maybe just muttering about the breakfast cheese again. Hard to tell. Either way, the discipline is eerie. Every few minutes, they break into a sudden sprint, then stop as one. This is the psychological warfare part. Mongols didn't just fight battles, they performed them, and much of their ritual prep involved rehearsing fear. Not their fear, yours. You're shown how certain warriors wear masks painted with snarling expressions, often based on animals or spirits. The goal, to terrify opponents from a distance. One soldier wears a half mask shaped like a boar's face, complete with tusks. You compliment him. He snarls. You back away respectfully. Quirky tidbit of the day, some accounts claim that certain Mongol commanders had their troops carry cursed stones into battle. Small rocks said to have absorbed the negative energy of defeated enemies. They would be buried after victories, a kind of spiritual garbage disposal. Is it true? Who knows? But you see someone burying a small pouch under a tree later, and you're not about to dig it up and test the theory. There's debate among historians about how uniformly these rituals were practiced. Some say only elite units and bodyguards performed the full ceremonies. Others believe even the rank-and-file Mongol horsemen began every campaign with ritual cleansing, fasting, or chants. Either way, the army didn't operate on brute force alone, it operated on belief. And belief is powerful. Even if it smells like burning goat hair and sounds like someone gargling gravel. You spend the afternoon observing a prayer ceremony for fallen warriors. A semicircle of soldiers gathers around a small fire. A mare's mane is offered to the flames, haircut carefully and tied with thread. Boca sings in that same eerie double tone. Some soldiers wipe their eyes. Others just sit silent and grim. You feel it, though. The collective pressure of shared grief. It's not loud. It's not weeping and wailing. It's the way everyone leans forward slightly, the way no one interrupts. It's reverent, and it keeps the soul of the army from unraveling. After the ceremony, the troops slowly rise, return to tasks. Polish weapons, adjust saddles. No speeches, no hugs. Just purpose. You're led to a different circle, this one full of younger warriors, where Boki offers a different kind of ritual dream interpretation. A nervous-looking boy explains a dream about his horse growing wings and flying away. Boca listens, hums, then says it's a sign of either glory or betrayal, or both. The boy nods solemnly. You lean over and whisper, So, no pressure, right? He doesn't laugh. You back away again. As the sun sets, you take a moment to walk alone. You're starting to understand that for the Mongol soldier, every moment, not just battle, is part of the campaign. It's mental preparation. It's soul work. It's surviving in a world where death comes quickly, so meaning must be built from rhythm repetition and reverence. You pass a cluster of warriors painting protective symbols on their boughs with crushed berries. They laugh and talk, but each symbol is careful, precise. These aren't idle doodles. They're shields for the heart. Back at camp, Boka gives you one final task. Burn a pinch of salt and whisper a secret wish. You do. The salt pops loudly and he chuckles. Sky is listening, he says. You lie down, talisman warm against your chest, soot in your nose, and a faint echo of throat singing still humming in your ears. And you realize belief isn't just armor for the soul, it's the net that keeps your mind from falling apart. It's your turn to stand guard tonight. Not on the front line, not in a glamorous officer's post. Just one of the countless invisible gears in the ticking machine of the Mongol war camp. You're standing with a spear in one hand, a torch in the other, and the distinct feeling that if anything does go wrong, you'll be the first to find out the hard way. Welcome to night watch duty in the Mongol army. The air is cold. Not a little chilly cold, but why are my eyelashes freezing cold? And there's no moon tonight, which means your torch is your best friend, and also the only thing separating you from the total blackness beyond the camp's edge. But don't worry, you're not alone. There's a rotating team of sentries spaced in wide arcs around the camp perimeter, some on foot like you, some on horseback slowly patrolling a larger ring beyond the tents. It's a staggered defense system, and it's been honed over decades of conquest. Mainstream historical fact, the Mongol army was incredibly disciplined about security. Guard rotations were constant, especially in hostile territory. Units had strict punishments for any soldier caught sleeping on watch. And yes, you're pretty sure you heard the story about a guy who dozed off once and ended up latrine duty for a month. Or maybe forever. Your assigned shift is the third of the night, the one most hated by everyone. It starts just after midnight and ends right before dawn, the time when exhaustion reaches its peak and the cold cuts deepest. Lucky you. Your eyes adjust slowly. Shapes of tents become shadows. The distant snorts of horses rise from the stables. Somewhere a dog barks once and is silent. You grip your torch tighter. Half an hour in, you hear something rustle near the edge of the supply cart. You inch closer, spear ready, only to find a goat chewing on a saddlebag. You sigh in relief. The goat just stares back like you're the weirdo. You apologize and shoo it back toward camp. And then you hear a low whistle, a signal. You respond with a click of your tongue, one of several agreed-on cues used by Mongol patrols. This one means nothing to report. Another watchman echoes it from somewhere deeper in the dark. That's the quirky tidbit of the night. Mongol guards didn't use loud calls or bugles. Instead, they developed subtle, often animal-like sounds, whistles, clucks, chirps, to communicate silently during patrols. It was clever, quiet, and totally unnerving the first few times you heard it. Back to your route. You make another round of the tents, noting each shape, each outline. You count the shadows to keep track of time. 1, 2, 3. That's the meat tent. 4, that's Boka's sacred drum tent. 5, wait. The 6th shadow looks wrong. You stop. Is it a person? An animal? A badly tied tarp. You lower your torch. Nothing moves. You take a cautious step forward. Still nothing. Then the wind shifts and you realize it's just a bundle of firewood stacked awkwardly. Crisis averted. Heart rate still 300 beats per minute. You resume your walk, occasionally stopping to stir one of the small watchfires spaced between tent groups. These aren't for warmth. They're part of a psychological trick. From a distance, the fires make the camp look larger, more active. It's all part of the illusion of a constant, unblinking defense. Even if half the soldiers are sleeping like stone slabs. Here's a historian debate just how large were typical Mongol encampments. Some sources suggest sprawling, organized cities of yurts and mobile stalls. Others argue that in wartime, the army stripped camp life down to bare essentials, minimal tents, just enough infrastructure to move fast. Archaeological evidence leans both ways depending on the region. Some digs show surprisingly complex temporary settlements. Others, nothing but ash and hoof prints. Either way, tonight's setup is modest. About 100 tents tightly packed. Fire lines every 20 yards. Horses tethered close. Supply carts arranged in a semicircle to act as a makeshift barrier. Simple, efficient, cold. You swap shifts briefly with a scout on horseback, just for variety. The horse is warm, which is nice, but your legs go numb after 10 minutes and the saddle's creaking makes you paranoid. At one point, you're sure you spot movement in the tree line, but it turns out to be a fox with half a rabbit in its mouth. You nod in respect. Real hunter. Back at your post, another guard offers you a dried fig from his pouch. You try to chew it quietly, but it's like gnawing on a leather sandal. Still, the sugar helps. You stay awake. You must stay awake. Time slows, your thoughts drift. What would you be doing if you hadn't joined this army? Selling felt in Karakoram, plowing frozen dirt somewhere near Lake Baikal, living a quiet, less arrow-filled life. You pull your coat tighter and keep walking. Just before dawn, you see the eastern sky begin to shift. Not light exactly, just less dark. A suggestion of color. The first bird calls. You've made it. You haven't seen a single enemy scout, haven't been eaten by wolves, and haven't passed out into the fire. When your replacement arrives, he salutes casually and flops into your recently warmed post without a word. You nod, hand over the torch, and shuffle off. Your reward. A lukewarm bowl of porridge and 3 minutes of leg stretching before morning duty starts. Because in the Mongol army, rest is really just another word for brief change of suffering. Still, you feel weirdly proud. You helped keep the camp safe. You stood alone in the dark and didn't run screaming at a goat. That counts for something. As the sun finally pushes above the horizon, casting gold over the snowy hills and the sea of sleeping tents, you realize something. This army isn't just built on tactics and terror. It's built on patience, endurance. The quiet kind of courage that comes from standing your ground when no one's looking. From walking the perimeter in the dark, just in case. And tomorrow night, you'll probably be out there again. The sun barely peaks above the horizon before a gruff voice shoves you back into reality training day again. But not the usual horseback gallop or archery relay. Today, you're being taught the fine art of handling prisoners and conquered civilians. Oh, good. Because war crimes are such a soothing bedtime topic. You line up with a dozen other grunts near the camp's eastern edge. The morning wind is sharp and someone's breath smells aggressively of last night's fermented mare's milk. You scoot slightly away. A high-ranking officer named Torgud begins to speak slowly and deliberately, as if he assumes you've all been recently hit in the head with a mace. Which is statistically possible. Every war has leftovers, he says, pacing. People. Families. Cities. Things we break and things we take. You swallow and try to look attentive. Torgud explains the Mongol policy in 2 categories, valuable and problematic. The valuable artisans, blacksmiths, scribes, translators, and sometimes even musicians. People who contribute directly to the empire's logistical machine. The problematic, pretty much everyone else. Mainstream historical fact. The Mongols were incredibly pragmatic about captured populations. They didn't slaughter indiscriminately, though it happened, but neither were they running medieval outreach programs. Skilled prisoners were often integrated into the army or administration. Unskilled ones might become laborers, or simply left behind. Your march past a temporary holding area, a fenced-off cluster of people wrapped in patchwork cloaks in fear. Women clutching children. Men staring blankly ahead. A translator, a wiry guy from the southern steppes, explains that these were villagers resisting tax demands. Their village was torched 2 days ago. Now they're part of the survivor management plan. The phrase makes your stomach turn. A prisoner, a middle-aged woman with strong arms and a steady glare, is separated from the group. Torgud nods. Blacksmith, he says. We need arrowheads. She's led away gently by a junior officer. Another man, clearly frail, is pulled aside. No use, Torgun mutters. You look away. Here's a quirky tidbit: some captured children were adopted by Mongol families, raised as full citizens, and even became soldiers later. Not out of compassion, just cold efficiency. A child who owed their life to the empire was often loyal for life. You're shown how to interrogate someone without using actual force, just observation pressure and tone. Mongols valued information, especially about terrain, enemy numbers, and hidden supplies. If a prisoner had intel, they'd be questioned by a nokur, a personal retainer known for loyalty, and, let's be honest, intimidation. And this is where it gets fuzzy. Historians still argue whether Mongol interrogation practices were systematized or more improvised, depending on the officer. Some sources mention torture. Others emphasize psychological tactics, threats, lies, even promises of safety. You're told to look people in the eyes and find the weak thought. You wonder if your own weak thoughts are just leaking out at this point. Torgud takes you to a burned village on the edge of a ravine. Smoke still curls from charred wooden beams. A few chickens wander the ruins somehow unbothered. This was a staging point for a local rebellion. A warning flag now hangs from a pole, a red cloth with a black slash through the middle. It means punishment complete. You're told to help document the salvageable supplies, grain tools, intact weapons. The village's remaining population, 20, maybe 30 people, are herded together and offered a choice: relocate as laborers or remain and risk further consequences. You don't need to ask what that means. One man begs to be taken as a scout. He's tested on directions, naming mountain passes and river routes. He passes, barely. He's given a token, a carved medallion, and told he's now provisional auxiliary. If he betrays the army, he'll be executed without ceremony. He nods, says nothing. You and a few others are assigned escort duty for the new laborers, marching them back to the main encampment. The mood is heavy. No one speaks. A baby cries once and is quickly hushed. As you walk, a senior guard beside you says, "Don't think too much, just do the work." You try that for a few minutes, it doesn't help. Back at camp, the new arrivals are processed. A boy with clever hands is taken to the fletching tent. 2 women are assigned to animal care, the rest are directed to a temporary pen near the cooking area. Not cells, just fences. No one's shackled, but no one can leave. This is where it becomes clear the Mongol army wasn't just a war machine. It was an engine of absorption. It didn't just destroy, it converted. Villages became labor camps. Survivors became resources. Cultures were broken down and fed into the empire like coal into a furnace. Later that night, during debriefing, an officer reads out a list of civilian names. Some are kept for records. Some are struck through. You don't ask why. The ink seems too thick, too final. You eat dinner in silence. Even Greg the horse looks solemn. You offer him some oats. He declines, which is saying something. Before bed, you help a fellow recruit repair a broken yurt panel. It's small, meaningless work, but comforting. When the wind blows hard, the yurt groans a little, but it holds. So do you, barely. Because here's the thing. No one tells you about conquest. It's not just the killing that breaks you, it's the organizing afterward. The sorting of lives, the routine, the clipboard. And by now you've realized something important. You're not just part of an army, you're part of an empire that doesn't stop moving, doesn't pause to reflect, doesn't grieve. It just absorbs and keeps going. You curl up back to the fire, wondering if the woman blacksmith is still forging somewhere nearby, or if you'll dream about ink tonight. Another day, another dust storm. The wind howls across the plains like a ghost, with a grudge turning the sky into a gray soup of grit and despair. You're wearing a scarf over your face, but it's mostly symbolic. Dust is already in your mouth, eyes, ears, and very possibly your soul. You've stopped blinking. It's like being sandpapered by nature for 6 hours straight. Welcome to the lovely weather conditions the Mongol army trudges through when Mother Earth decides to tantrum. The campaign has paused again not for mercy, but for logistics. You're stuck in one of those irritating non-battle interludes where nobody's attacking, but everybody's suffering. The dust reduces visibility to the length of your arm and communication has gone full caveman. You mostly grunt and point. A soldier next to you uses hand signals you're pretty sure he made up. The camp's eerily quiet. Not peaceful quiet, more like everyone's too annoyed to speak quiet. Horses cough. Children cry. The stew pot bubbles faintly, though nobody wants to eat anything that's 30% sediment. Mainstream historical fact. Mongol armies marched through wildly diverse climates. From frozen Siberian tundras to parched Persian deserts, they adapted not by avoiding bad weather, but by muscling through it with grim efficiency. Even when that meant storms like this that literally peeled skin off lips. You're assigned to patrol the camp edge again because apparently the officers drew straws and you lost. The dust stings your eyes and you feel like you've been swimming in powdered brick. You shuffle past a huddle of camels who honestly seem like they're handling this better than you are. You salute them. They ignore you majestic jerks. Halfway through your shift, you run into Tomor, a lanky warrior whose idea of fun is inventing riddles nobody can solve. He says, "What can be carried without hands?" Yet dropped with a word you stare. Morale, he grins. You groan. He cackles and disappears into the beige fog. Let's talk about how this weather messes with everything. Cooking ruined. You try boiling rice and end up with something that crunches like gravel. Firewood useless when it's damp or buried in sand. Horses spooked, agitated, and covered in a layer of dust thick enough to write poetry on their flanks. And then there's you, sore, underfed, and perpetually itchy. You scratch your arm so much you invent a new patch of skin geography. The weird mole on your shoulder is now the lonely mount. You give it a flag. The boredom is getting to you. Quirky tidbit Mongols used yak fat candles and bronze mirrors to signal across distances during weather events, flashing light like prehistoric Morse code. In storms, this system was sometimes the only way to coordinate troops across vast, murky fields. It sounds elegant until the dust blocks the sun, the candles sputter, and the mirrors just reflect your own filthy face back at you. You retreat to a tent only to discover someone already claimed your spot with a pile of saddle blankets and a half-eaten turnip. You consider challenging them, but decide it's not worth risking your remaining molars. As night falls, you discover that dust storms don't stop, they just evolve. Now the wind drops, but the air turns icy. The dust doesn't swirl, it settles. On your blanket, in your cup, in your nose. You blow it out into your hand and briefly consider framing it as modern art. Dinner is a barely chewable mash of mystery root and smoked marmot. You ask what the meat is. The cook says, "Don't." You take a bite anyway. Your stomach gives a theatrical groan like an opera singer collapsing in Act 3. Historians still argue whether Mongol soldiers received regular rations or scavenged based on availability. Some records describe detailed food distribution systems with supply officers called Karachu, while others imply long stretches of borderline starvation, supplemented by horseblood-dried curds and whatever could be scraped off a tree. Tonight, you're leaning toward the scraped-off-a-tree school of culinary realism. As you settle in for sleep, a dull thump shakes the ground. Not an enemy, just another tent collapsing under a combination of shoddy knots and sheer pessimism. You help pull the fabric off a dazed soldier who thanks you by sneezing directly into your face. Ah, camaraderie. You try to sleep. You really do. But everything itches. Your blanket crunches when you roll over. You've somehow inhaled dust into your ear canal, and the guy next to you snores like a dying goose gargling gravel. Eventually you sit up, lean against a tent pole, and stare into the murky dark. In the quiet, you hear distant laughter. Someone's found a bottle. Lucky them. You think about home, not a specific place, just the idea of not here. Of clear skies, clean air, and a pillow that isn't shaped like a damp saddle. You imagine running water, fresh bread, a warm bath. Then you remember you've never actually had a bath, and you're romanticizing something that probably involves soap and screaming. Still, the idea is comforting, even if your entire body currently feels like it's been rolled in cinnamon and left in a bakery overnight. The next morning, the wind finally dies down. The camp emerges blinking and miserable like ants after a boot. Fires are relit. Horses shake off their layers of dust. Someone uncovers a half-buried helmet. It's not yours, but you keep it anyway. Congratulations, your armor set is now 7% less embarrassing. You brush sand out of your socks and your eyebrows and your heart. A commander calls for the next formation drill. You sigh, you itch, you trudge forward. Because in the Mongol army, weather isn't an excuse. It's just another opponent. The sun rises red like it's embarrassed for what you're about to endure. Today, the order comes down the line with all the cheerful energy of a funeral dirge reconnaissance duty. You, a handful of sleep-deprived recruits, and a grizzled guide named Batu are heading deep into contested territory to map enemy movement and terrain. You were hoping for something with less definitely die energy. Maybe a little more tent repair, but no, today you get to sneak through brush with someone who calls human bones good omens. Batu ties his boots with horse sinew, mutters to himself in Old Turkic, and carries a knife that looks like it predates the invention of fear. Before you set out, the quartermaster tosses you a dried meat ration and says, "Try not to get captured. The last guy still owes me a blanket." He laughs. You don't. Mainstream historical fact. Mongol reconnaissance was famously effective. Scouts rode days ahead of the main army, often traveling hundreds of miles to gather intelligence on terrain water sources and enemy vulnerabilities. Their success often decided the fate of entire campaigns before a single arrow was loosed. Your unit rides silently for hours, keeping low and skirting the horizon. The wind carries the smell of sagebrush and something distinctly burnt. You try not to ask questions. Batu occasionally raises a finger and tilts his head as if listening for whispers only he can hear. You try it too. You hear your own stomach. The landscape shifts from open steppe to broken ground. Ravines dry riverbeds, clusters of scrubby trees. Perfect for ambushes. Excellent for tripping and dying. A vulture circles overhead. You name it Gary because if you're going to get picked clean by a bird, it might as well have a friendly name. The first ruined watchtower appears at midday. It's old possibly from a rival Khanate and half collapsed. Batu signals a stop. 2. You dismount, stretch your aching knees, and step gingerly through the rubble. Inside you find an abandoned saddlebag, half a map helpfully singed, and a single bronze coin stamped with the face of a king who's very likely dead. Batu takes the coin, bites it, shrugs, and pockets it. Still warm, he mutters. That doesn't mean anything helpful, but it's haunting anyway. A quirky tidbit some Mongol scouts trained hawks not to hunt but to signal. If the bird returned early or refused to launch it, sometimes meant enemies were nearby. This method wasn't common, but in regions where tall grass or thick forest limited visibility, it could offer a feathered edge. Batu, for the record, doesn't use birds. He prefers to sniff the air like a lost dog and say cryptic things like, "The ground doesn't trust us here." You continue on foot to avoid leaving tracks. Your boots crunch over pebbles and you find yourself constantly scanning the horizon, as if your eyeballs can protect you. Batu has you stop every few hundred steps to listen. He calls it feeling the silence. You mostly feel like sneezing. As dusk approaches, you spot movement across a dry gulch, figures on horseback, maybe 5 or 6 bearing unfamiliar banners. Batu pushes you all flat against the dirt and holds up a finger to his lips. You breathe like you're trying not to upset the atmosphere. The riders don't approach. They move like a patrol checking ground looking for trails. One dismounts, picks something up, and gestures. They leave a marker. Then, just as quickly, they disappear behind a ridge. You all stay down for another half hour. Batu finally speaks enemy scouts, south border, fast horses. Good gear, that's all he says. That's all he needs to say. The rest of the intel, what you felt, what you saw, what wasn't there, will be recorded later. In the Mongol system, even negative data matters. No footprints in the west. That means the enemy isn't there. That's something. Historians still argue whether Mongol scouts relied more on formal maps or mental terrain models. There's evidence of both hand-drawn diagrams inked on cloth and detailed oral briefings with spatial accuracy that would impress a GPS satellite. Batu, you're sure keeps the entire step in his head like it's a bedtime story. You camp for the night in a dry hollow shielded by brush. Fires are forbidden. Light is death. You chew cold, dried meat and sip water that tastes like regret. Someone tries to hum a lullaby. Batu silences them with a stare that could start an avalanche. In the darkness, paranoia sets in. Every snap of a twig feels like doom. Every shift in the wind smells like betrayal. You think of home again, not because it's comforting, but because it feels like an ancient rumor. Something that may never have existed. You dream in snatches. Sand-blood shadows. Gary, the vulture, laughing. When you wake, Batu is already standing watching the horizon like it insulted his mother. The return trip is faster. Scouts never linger longer than necessary. You take a different route back, marking passes and water sources. You even find a shallow cave with signs of recent habitation, a burnt stick, a scrap of cloth, half a footprint. Next time, Batu says, "You're not sure if he means you'll use this spot next time or find someone in it." Back at camp, the officers gather to hear your report. You stand awkwardly as Batu speaks in curt, efficient bursts. Terrain conditions? Sightings? No contact. Enemy 2 days east. They nod. Maps are updated. Orders are adjusted. Campaigns swing on this data. You realize something in a world before satellites or drones. You are the surveillance. Your nervous eyes, your blistered feet, your haunted memory of banners on the horizon. All of it matters. You are a node in the war machine, a frightened node, but a useful one. Later that evening, someone hands you a bowl of hot stew. It's the best thing you've eaten in weeks, even if it might contain parts of an animal you can't legally name. You sit near the fire, trying not to think about how many eyes in the darkness might be watching you now. You made it back. Barely. And tomorrow you go again. You wake to the smell of wet wool and a horse breathing directly into your face. It's not the gentle, cinematic kind of wake-up, more like a hay-scented jump scare. The horse blinks at you as if to say you're late. Which you are. The entire camp is in motion faster than usual. Word spreads fast. Enemy forces have been spotted at the eastern ridge. Not a full engagement yet, but it's coming. You're not just marching, you're redeploying. Which is Mongol for, we ride now, sleep later, and eat when the arrows stop. Your saddle creaks as you climb on. Your thighs scream in protest. Too bad. The convoy snakes forward like an iron-scaled serpent dust, curling up around the hooves and wheels. Riders ahead carry signal flags, bright colors that flutter like gossip in the wind. One flap from a red cloth and the whole rear guard adjusts course. It's elegant, silent, almost musical. You'd appreciate it more if your butt didn't feel like it had been run over by a siege cart. Mainstream historical fact. Mongol armies perfected a relay and communication system called the Yam, a network of stations spaced roughly every 25-30 miles. Messages could move faster than any rival courier system in the medieval world, often covering hundreds of miles in a day thanks to fresh horses and skilled riders. You're not delivering messages today. You're part of the eastward sweep, one of dozens of roving units sent to stretch, surround, and strangle an enemy column before it can set its boots. You ride in a line with 20 others, spaced just far enough that you can shout if something moves, but not so far that your own panic can't reach help. An hour into the ride, you see it, a wisp of smoke, curling from the trees maybe 5 miles ahead. Too small for a forest fire. Too deliberate. You signal. A flag goes up. The column shifts like a school of fish. 5 riders break off, you included. You ride low and fast. Every hoofbeat feels like a coin flip. At the edge of the woods, you dismount, tie the horses, and advance on foot. The underbrush is thick, damp, and riddled with bugs that see your face as a buffet. You find the source quickly, a smoldering cook fire, some discarded bones, and footprints in the mud. Human. Recent. But whoever was here is long gone. Batu. Yes, Batu again runs his fingers through the ashes and frowns. 3 men, he mutters, one sick. One with soft boots. Scouts, maybe. Quirky tidbit Mongols were obsessive about boot prints. Scouts were trained to recognize shoe patterns wear on soles, even gait from stride length. There are stories of commanders redirecting an entire unit based on the angle of a single partial footprint. It sounds like magic, but it's really just dirt plus terrifying observational skills. You return to your horse to find someone fed it a handful of dried apple. Traitor. It likes them better than it likes you. Typical. Back on the move, the terrain gets trickier. Rolling hills. Rocky outcrops. Trees thick as gossip in a noble court. The command signals change. You go single file, then silent, then halt. A runner arrives out of breath and bleeding from a scraped arm. His message is simple: enemy light cavalry spotted to the southeast. They're not far. Maybe 2 hills over. This isn't a drill. This is real. Historians still argue whether Mongol army flexibility was due more to planning or sheer ruthless improvisation. Some accounts emphasize detailed contingency maps and signal codes. Others lean into the mystique of instinctual coordination, where units acted like body parts without the brain needing to say a word. You've now lived it. It's both. It's horrifying. A decision is made. Your squad will flank and delay, essentially distract the enemy long enough for a larger force to swing behind. Sounds honorable. Also sounds a lot like bait. You get a new quiver of arrows, a better one with barbed tips. You take it, you nod. You try not to cry in front of Bay too. You ride again faster this time. You crest the ridge and see them a cluster of riders in darker armor, looser formation but fast. Maybe 15, maybe 20. You don't wait to count. The ambush isn't elegant. It's not even clean. It's chaos and screaming and hoofbeats on gravel and branches in your face. You fire, you miss, you reload. You hit something, probably a tree. Batu brings one enemy down with a sweeping slice, then turns and yells something that's either an insult or a prayer. An arrow zips past your ear. You feel the air bend, and then as quickly as it began, it's over. The enemy pulls back, spooked maybe, or just regrouping. 2 of your own are wounded. 1 isn't moving. Batu doesn't check. He just points. Mount, ride. You don't argue. You fall back into forest, licking wounds and checking gear. Your hand is bleeding, you didn't notice. It's nothing, or maybe it's something. Hard to tell when your heart is in your throat and your ears are ringing. Eventually, you reach the rendezvous point, a wide clearing muddy from last night's storm. More riders join you. A commander nods. Stall successful, he says. Main body will engage at dawn. You slump to the ground. Someone hands you water. You drink it like it's gold. You're alive. But only just. That's the thing about Mongol military campaigns. Victory isn't a triumphant cheer at the end of a march. It's not dying enough days in a row that eventually the map changes in your favor. Later that night, the camp sets up perimeter fires, low flickering defensive. Horses are tied. Wounds are tended. Stories are told in mutters. One guy claims he took down 2 men with 1 arrow. Another insists he shouted so loud the enemy fled. You all nod politely. Nobody believes him. You sit with Batu, who sharpens his blade like it insulted him in a past life. You rode well, he says, like it pains him. You thank him. He grunts, that's affection. The moon rises, the battle is tomorrow, and you'll be there on the front line or the flank. Because apparently you survived today. And Mongol survival comes with the worst reward, another chance to die gloriously. The air is cold enough to make your breath visible. It hangs around your face like ghostly punctuation, short and shallow. You're awake before the signal horn sounds, before the horses stir, before even the birds risk chirping. Because today you're not scouting, not trailing, not playing mobile lookout. Today you're fighting. The command has come down full engagement. The enemy force, likely a confederation of smaller tribes, has taken up a defensive position just south of a dry riverbed. High ground, limited access, clever. You'd respect it more if you weren't about to charge into it. You cinch your belt tighter, recheck your bowstring, tuck the charm Batu gave you into your boot. It's a rat skull. You didn't ask questions. Mainstream historical fact. The Mongols approached battle with terrifying precision. Their attacks were often preceded by feigned retreats, flanking maneuvers, and false signals. Rarely did they commit their full force at once unless they were absolutely certain it would obliterate resistance. And right now, the generals are certain. Your unit is on the right flank. You won't be in the initial charge. That honor goes to the elite, heavy cavalry, the Noyans, and their hand-picked killers, but you'll sweep in after mopping up resistance or chasing down runners. You don't know which is worse. Batu is with you. Of course he is. He hasn't taken off his helmet in 3 days and smells like burned onions and destiny. He holds a hand over his eyes and surveys the field. Too quiet, he mutters. They're not stupid. You take that to mean stay alive. The signal horn blows 3 low notes rising. The first wave moves hooves thundering across the plain like 1,000 falling drums. Dust curls into the sky, banners snap in the wind, and somewhere a trumpet tries to sound fierce but mostly sounds anxious. You wait. Then your own horn calls 2 quick bursts. Time to ride. The ground beneath you is hard-cracked, resisting your horse's hooves like an insult. You lower your body forward, keeping small, keeping fast. Arrows whistle overhead. Yours and theirs an invisible storm of death and splinters. You think you see a rider go down 20 feet ahead, but there's no time to stop. You ride past him, his boot sticking awkwardly up from the grass like he died mid-yoga. You reach the outer edge of the enemy formation. They're dug in all right makeshift palisades, thick logs bristling spears. They weren't just hiding, they were waiting. Mongol forces don't usually favor frontal assault, so this is just a tease. The real move is coming. And there it is. To your left, a fresh surge of riders appears, your riders, not theirs. They weren't visible a minute ago. Hidden in a riverbed, perhaps. Or behind one of those low ridges that seemed so innocent when you passed them earlier. Quirky tidbit Mongol commanders often staged ghost units, invisible wings of cavalry, that didn't appear until halfway through battle. Some would even wear mismatched uniforms or fly enemy banners to confuse and scatter opposing forces. The enemy today definitely looks confused. You'd be too if warriors you didn't see 5 seconds ago were suddenly rearranging your facial expression. You dismount at Batu's command. Firing from the ground offers better control at close range. You notch an arrow, aim low, and release. It hits someone. Might have been a horse. Might have been a man. Either way, you're now officially in it. The smell is something no one warns you about. Not blood, though that's there, but hot leather sweat-soaked armor, and something tangy that might be fear. Yours, probably. A cluster of enemy fighters charges your position. You fall back by design, leading them into an arc of 5 other Mongol archers who open fire with machine-like precision. They fall, not all of them, but enough. Historians still argue whether Mongol battlefield success owed more to their decentralized command structure or their rigorous discipline. On one hand, junior officers had flexibility to adapt. On the other, they followed broader orders with laser focus. You're not sure where Batu falls. He's just waving at you to move again. You scramble up a slope to higher ground. From here, the view is almost cinematic. Swirling riders, dust trails, flashes of metal and fire. It would be beautiful if it weren't trying to kill you. Batu crouches beside you, scanning the chaos. We've got 5 minutes, he says. Maybe 6. To live, you ask dryly. He grins. To win. He calls the shot. Your team will press left, hit a weak spot in their rear guard, and open a path for the 2nd Cavalry line. You nod because arguing feels unproductive when your pulse is louder than your thoughts. The next charge is a blur. You ride hard, veering into the chaos. You pass a Mongol officer with blood on his chin who yells more east, and you obey without questioning. The plan, whatever it was, is evolving mid-stride. You crash through the rear ranks of the enemy force, arrows loosed at close range. It's not graceful, it's not even fair, but it works. The enemy begins to falter their formations, breaking into defensive clumps. You pull back for a moment, panting. Someone hands you a water skin. It's sour but cold. You drink it like it's your last, and then just as suddenly it's over. The field clears. The enemy is either fleeing or surrendering. Mongol riders circle the survivors, corralling them like errant sheep. No one cheers. That's not the Mongol way. Victory is expected, not celebrated. Besides, cheering takes energy. You survey the damage. Maybe 50 dead. Maybe more. Horses limp. Weapons lie scattered like children's toys. You spot Batu again. He's talking to a younger rider, gesturing toward the tree line, likely sending him on some grim errand. You sit. You don't mean to. Your legs just sort of decide. One of the senior officers rides past, slowing just enough to nod in your direction. That's high praise. Almost affectionate. Another rider offers you dried apricots. You eat two before realizing they're probably older than you. The sun begins to set, painting the sky orange and bruised. You're told you'll be moving again tomorrow. There's a town 3 days east that needs persuading. But tonight you'll rest. You've earned that much. You lie back on the torn-up earth, your helmet as a pillow. Your hands still tremble. Your ears ring. You feel like a string pulled too tight. But you're here. You survived your first battle. And in the Mongol army, that's rarer than gold and twice as heavy. You wake with stiffness in your limbs that feels permanent. The kind of ache that gets into your bones and decides to sublet the place. Your armor, your boots, your saddle sores, all of it fused into one long complaint. You shift groan and realize someone's already nudging you awake. Beitu naturally. He offers no words, just jerks his head in the direction of movement. Mongol silence is louder than most people's shouting. Camp is being struck. Horses are fed, watered, and repacked. The fires are out. The ashes cold, and the field behind you, scarred and littered from yesterday's clash, already feels like history. Except, of course, for the smell. That'll linger. Today's task isn't conquest, it's cleanup. Gathering prisoners, confiscating weapons, evaluating the dead. Your favorite. Mainstream historical fact. The Mongols maintained detailed post-battle records, body counts, captured livestock weapons, collected even how many arrows were expended. Quartermasters were expected to recoup or reforge what was lost. In a world with no supply lines stretching for thousands of miles, reuse was essential. Waste was weakness, so you trudge. Through the mess, through the awkward peace that feels less like relief and more like the silence after a loud argument. You help count arrows. You collect unbroken spears. You watch as wounded horses are tended to with a mixture of care and resignation. One of the medics, an old man who smells like fermented goat milk, offers to look at your bruises. You decline. He shrugs. Probably for the best. You pass the enemy wounded, now prisoners. Some stare at you with hate, others with blank, weary eyes. One spits. You don't react. Batu does, though, with a swift kick to the man's shin. Bad manners, he mutters. Later, you're called to help interrogate a local herdsman. The man trembles under the attention of 3 mounted riders, one of whom carries a long, thin whip. They ask questions. Where were the scouts based? Who helped supply them? Did anyone in the next town warn them of the Mongol advance? The man speaks a dialect you barely understand. It doesn't matter. The translator's eyes say enough. You leave before they're done. Quirky tidbit. Some Mongol interrogators used puppets. Yes, actual puppets to coax confessions from children or nervous captives. The idea was to disarm them, make the moment absurd. It was terrifyingly effective. Like all things Mongol, even the weird was weaponized. You're assigned a new horse. Yours went lame during yesterday's flank. The new one is meaner, taller, and looks at you like it already hates your face. You name it, regret. Your next stop is a town called Kujer, a cluster of mud brick homes and barley fields crouched between two low ridges. It hasn't resisted yet, but it also hasn't surrendered, which is enough to warrant a visit. You arrive near dusk, riders fan out, banners rise. A single emissary rides forward with a message scroll tied in red ribbon. The town elders come out to meet him shivering in their robes. They talk, they gesture, they bow. Then the scroll is handed over. Then the elders disappear inside. Then you wait. Historians still argue whether Mongol diplomacy was truly diplomatic or simply weaponized courtesy. Cities that accepted peace were often spared, yes, but spared didn't always mean unharmed. Taxes were steep, conscription inevitable, and cultural erasure quietly thorough. But compared to destruction, mercy. Kuchert decides to comply. They offer food grain horses and even a few teenagers for service. You flinch when you see them. Boys barely older than you, some not even that. One looks back at his mother who doesn't wave. She just watches like her heart's been exiled. Batu makes you write their names in a ledger. You do. It feels heavy like forging fate with a piece of charcoal. After the exchange, the mood softens. A few musicians are allowed to play by the outer fires. Someone roasts meat on a spit. There's even singing a kind of low, throaty harmony that makes your ribs vibrate. For the first time in weeks, people laugh. A real laugh, not the dry wheeze of shared trauma. Batu sits beside you gnawing on what might be rabbit or might be regret. You did well, he says. You still smell like a goat, but less like a lost one. You take that as praise. You think of the boys from Kujert, of the prisoners, of the rider who went down near the ridge, of the cold eyes of the elder who handed over his town to survive. You've survived too, for now, but something inside you has shifted. Not cracked, just tilted. Like the ground beneath you might never be fully flat again. Later, under a blanket of stars so bright they hurt to look at you lie beside your horse, listening to it chew in the darkness. You whisper, thanks to it, it ignores you. Fair. Batu's already snoring. Someone a few tents down is quietly crying. Someone else is practicing archery even now long past dusk. The thud of arrows into hay bales marks time like a slow, steady drum. You close your eyes. And for the first time since this absurd journey began, you don't dream of dying. You dream of flat grasslands of wind over your face, and of a place where no one needs to ride fight or choose between surrender and ash. Tomorrow, it all begins again. But for tonight, you've done what few could. You've survived the Mongol army, and somehow you're still here. And now, as the fires of camp fade into embers and the soft rustling of horsetails replaces the chaos of hooves and arrows, you let your body relax. The air cools, brushing gently over your cheeks like the breath of the wide steppe. You stretch slowly, feeling each joint release, each tight muscle begin to ease from its battle drum tension into something softer, quieter. The night no longer feels like an enemy waiting to strike, but a companion wrapping you in deep, dark velvet. You did it. You made it through the saddles and the sweat, the feigned retreats, and the real ones, the aching cold and bone-deep fear. You've eaten what passed for food, marched where no road welcomed you, and stared down men who never blinked. You wore armor that chafed in all the wrong places and boots that made your toes question their life choices. And you're still breathing. The stars above bright, cold, unblinking feel less like watchers now and more like lullabies, ancient and distant and safe. The sounds of the camp, the quiet murmur of warriors too tired to brag, the low shuffle of horses in sleep, the hiss of embers settle over you like a heavy, warm blanket. You made it through a day no one in their right mind would choose. You didn't belong here, but you did it anyway. And now you rest. Sleep well, rider of the steppe. You're finally off the saddle, and you are home.